Get us the owner right now! My father yelled, his voice echoing through the marble halls of the elite country club. She does not belong here. My mother crossed her arms tightly and demanded I be removed immediately. I just sat there, quietly sipping my sparkling water. The manager turned his back to them, looked at me, and bowed slightly. "Ma, how would you like to handle your family membership?" he asked. The color completely drained from their faces. I am Zoe, 32 years old, and my family just learned the hard way who actually owns the ground they walk on. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to put toxic relatives in their place. It was a Tuesday afternoon, and I was sitting in the VIP lounge of the Oakmont Country Club. The air smelled of expensive leather roasted espresso and old money. I was wearing a simple tailored suit, reviewing some commercial acquisition documents on my tablet. I had finally found a moment of peace. Then the heavy mahogany doors swung open, and that peace shattered completely. My parents. Desmond and Helena marched into the lounge with my older sister Chloe and her husband Preston right behind them. They were here celebrating Chloe and Preston for their wedding anniversary. I had not been invited, of course. "Zoe, what are you doing in here, my mother?" Helena snapped, her voice loud enough to make several wealthy patrons turn their heads in our direction. "You cannot just sneak into the VIP section. This is not a place for ghetto dropouts." I did not flinch. I just took a slow sip of my water. My mother had always loved throwing that word around. Ghetto. It was her favorite weapon against me ever since I refused to conform to her obsession with high society and respectability politics. She and my father worshipped at the altar of status. They poured every dime they had into Chloe, making sure she had the perfect designer clothes, the perfect luxury car, and eventually the perfect white husband to elevate their social standing in Atlanta. Preston stepped forward, a smug grin plastered on his face. He was wearing a pastel polo shirt that screamed generational wealth, or at least his desperate illusion of it. "You heard her, Zoe," he sneered, looking me up and down with absolute disgust. "You need to leave before I have security escort you out." He turned to a passing waiter. "You might want to check her pockets for stolen silverware before she goes." She probably thought this was a free buffet. My parents did not reprimand him for the blatant racism. They never did. Desmond just nodded in agreement while Chloe giggled, clinging tightly to Preston's arm. Preston loved to weaponize his privilege against me. He constantly reminded everyone that his family had been members of Oakmont for 3 generations. He viewed me as the embarrassing dark-skinned sister-in-law who tarnished his pristine world. For years, my parents enabled his arrogance because having a son-in-law like Preston was their ultimate trophy. They traded their dignity for a proximity to whiteness that they thought would protect them. "Get the manager right now!" Desmond barked at the waiter, pointing a sharp finger at me. "Tell him we have an unauthorized trespasser. I pay good money to be a member here, and I will not have my anniversary lunch ruined by someone who cannot even afford the valet parking." I slowly set my glass down on the table. The waiter looked panicked and hurried away. Chloe stepped closer, looking down her nose at me with a pathetic pout. "Seriously, Zoe, it is actually sad that you would follow us here just to beg for money. We know your little side hustles never work out. Why do not you just leave quietly before you embarrass yourself further?" She was referring to the time I was 18, when our parents drained my entire college savings account to buy her a sports car. When I confronted them, they threw me out of the house with nothing but a trash bag of clothes. I had to build my real estate business from absolutely nothing, sleeping in my car, and working 3 minimum wage jobs. They thought I was still that broke, desperate teenager scraping by. They had no idea I had spent the last decade quietly acquiring distressed luxury assets across the state. Within moments, the general manager, Mr. Sterling, hurried into the VIP lounge, accompanied by 2 large security guards. Desmond puffed out his chest, looking triumphant, as the men approached our table. "Sterling. It is about time," my father said, using his most authoritative voice. "Remove this woman immediately. She is harassing my family and trespassing in a restricted area." Preston chimed in, adjusting his expensive watch with an arrogant flick of his wrist. "Make it quick, Sterling." My father is playing golf with the board of directors tomorrow, and I would hate to mention to him that club security has gotten so incredibly lax. Mr. Sterling stopped. He did not look at Desmond. He did not look at Preston. Instead, he walked straight past them, stopping directly in front of my table. He bowed his head slightly, his hands clasped behind his back in a show of total respect. Ma'am, he said, his voice carrying clearly across the quiet lounge. How would you like to handle your family membership? The silence that followed was absolute. Chloe dropped Preston's arm. Desmond's mouth fell open. Helena blinked rapidly, looking from the manager to me, as if she had suddenly forgotten how to speak English. What are you talking about? Preston demanded, his face turning an angry shade of red. She is nobody. I told you to throw her out. Mr. Sterling finally turned to my brother-in-law, his expression entirely neutral. I cannot throw out the owner, sir. Ms. Zoe finalized the purchase of the Oakmont Country Club early this morning. She owns the building, the grounds, and every membership contract currently on file. Helena stumbled back, bumping heavily into a leather chair. You bought the country club, she whispered, the reality hitting her like a physical blow. But you dropped out. You had nothing. I stood up, smoothing the front of my tailored suit. I dropped out of your toxic narrative, mother. I used the trauma you gave me as fuel to build a private equity firm. And it turns out Oakmont has been quietly facing bankruptcy for months. I bought their debt for pennies on the dollar. Preston tried to recover his arrogant posture, but his voice shook visibly. This is a joke. My family built this place. You cannot just buy it. I walked toward him, looking him dead in the eye. I just did, Preston. And since I am the new owner, I decided to do a little financial auditing this morning. I pulled a folded red document from my jacket pocket and dropped it onto the table. It landed with a soft thud that sounded incredibly loud in the silent room. Desmond looked at the paper, his hands starting to tremble. What is this? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. That is your membership tab, I said, keeping my tone dangerously calm. It seems your obsessive need to impress Preston family came at a very high cost. You are $150,000 past due on your club fees. You have been dining on credit for 2 years while acting like you owned the city. Chloe gasped, covering her mouth in horror. Dad, is that true? Desmond could not answer. He was staring at the bill, his entire facade of wealth and superiority shattering in front of the very people he tried so hard to impress. You have exactly 5 minutes, I told them, checking my watch. You can either pay the $150,000 in full right now, or Mr. Sterling will have security escort you out. And then I will be pressing charges for trespassing and theft of services. The clock is ticking, family. Preston slammed his hand onto the table, rattling the crystal water glasses. You are out of your mind if you think we are paying a dime, he shouted. He turned away from me and stepped aggressively toward the manager. My father is the senior partner at Harrison & Vance. We have been members here since before people who look like you were even allowed to walk through the front doors. I will have this entire establishment shut down, and I will personally see to it that you never work in hospitality again. Mr. Sterling did not blink. He stood his ground with the quiet dignity of a man who knew exactly where the real power resided. I simply raised 2 fingers in the air. 4 massive security guards stepped out and surrounded our table. The movement caught the attention of everyone in the VIP lounge. The mayor paused her conversation. The very people my parents had spent decades trying to impress were now watching their absolute unraveling. Desmond grabbed Preston's arm. You cannot do this, Zoe, my father hissed, his voice trembling with panic. We do not have $150,000 in liquid cash sitting around. Our capital is tied up in new developments. Give us a week. I checked my watch again. You have exactly 3 minutes left. If the balance is not settled immediately, I am calling the Atlanta Police Department. Helena let out a sharp gasp, gripping her chest. You would send your own parents to jail over a misunderstanding. She looked at the staring crowd. Desmond, do something. We cannot be arrested here. We will be ruined. I leaned forward. Then I suggest you find some collateral, mother. Helena stared at me, her eyes dropping to her own wrist. She was wearing a massive diamond tennis bracelet. It was a custom piece she had purchased the exact same week she told me I would have to take out predatory student loans because they could not afford to help me with college tuition. She had worn it to my high school graduation, where she complained the entire time about the cheap seating. "Take it off," I commanded, dropping my voice down. With trembling hands and tears of pure humiliation spilling down her cheeks, Helena unclasped the diamond bracelet and placed it next to the past due invoice. It clinked softly against the table. I nodded to Mr. Sterling. "This covers the immediate debt," I said, "but their membership is permanently revoked. Escort them off my property." Chloe burst into tears, burying her face in Preston's chest. As the security guards flanked them, they were marched out of the VIP lounge, through the main dining room, and out the front doors, in full view of Atlanta high society. I sat back in my chair, finally taking a peaceful sip of my sparkling water. The silence lasted exactly 3 days. On Friday morning, I was standing in my penthouse overlooking Buckhead when the lobby concierge sent up a process server. He handed me a thick manila envelope sealed with expensive wax. I opened it to find a formal legal summons. Desmond had called an emergency family meeting at his attorney office. The agenda was explicitly stated. They were officially disinheriting me from the family trust. For my entire life, the family trust had been the ultimate weapon my parents used to control me. Act properly or lose your share. Straighten your natural hair or get cut out. Stay quiet when Preston makes inappropriate jokes, or say goodbye to your future. They used that trust fund to keep Chloe blindly loyal, and they used it to remind me that my financial security was entirely dependent on their approval. Now that I had humiliated them, they were pulling the trigger. They thought taking away my inheritance would break my spirit. I arrived at the mahogany-paneled boardroom precisely on time. Desmond, Helena, Chloe, and Preston were already seated along one side of the massive glass table. Their high-priced lawyer, a stern-looking man with a graying beard, sat at the head. The moment I walked in, Chloe smirked, crossing her arms victoriously. Preston leaned back in his leather chair, radiating smug satisfaction. They looked like people who had just won a major war. The lawyer pushed a thick stack of papers toward my side of the table. "Zoe," he began, his tone dripping with practiced condescension, "your parents have made the difficult decision to sever all your legal ties to the family estate. By signing this document, you acknowledge your immediate and total removal from the family trust. You will receive nothing upon their passing." Desmond cleared his throat, adjusting his tie. "You brought this entirely on yourself, Zoe. You wanted to act like a thug at the country club and disrespect the people who gave you life. Now you get to learn exactly what happens when you bite the hand that feeds you. Sign the papers and keep whatever dignity you have left." Helena refused to even look at me, staring straight ahead with her chin raised. They expected a massive fight. They expected me to scream, to beg, to demand my rightful share as their daughter. Instead, I reached into my designer bag, pulled out my favorite fountain pen, and signed my name on the dotted line without bothering to read a single paragraph. The smug smiles vanished from their faces, instantly replaced by profound confusion. The lawyer frowned, pulling the document back to inspect the signature. "You did not even read the terms," Chloe blurted out, her voice rising in pitch. "You just gave up millions of dollars." I capped my pen and pulled a thick red folder from my bag, sliding it slowly across the smooth glass table until it stopped right in front of Preston. "You cannot disinherit me from a bankrupt trust," I said, my voice completely steady. "The real question is, where did the last $4 million go, Preston?" Preston choked on his next breath. The arrogant smirk melted off his face, leaving behind a pale mask of sheer panic. Chloe blinked rapidly, looking between her husband and the thick stack of bank statements spilling out of my red folder. I tapped a manicured fingernail against the top document. "You thought you were so clever routing the money through offshore shell companies. But you left a digital paper trail a mile long. $3.8 million transferred directly from Dad Commercial Logistics account into your failing tech startup over the last 14 full months. You bled the family business dry to fund an app that does not even exist." Desmond snatched the papers from the table, his eyes darting frantically across the highlighted bank routing numbers. "This is impossible," he muttered. "Preston handles our corporate expansions. He was securing international investments. I was paying off his massive gambling debts and keeping his sham of a company afloat, I corrected smoothly. You handed him the keys to your financial kingdom because you wanted to brag about having a wealthy tech executive son-in-law. Instead, you got a glorified con artist who views you as an open wallet. Preston slammed his fists on the glass table. Do not listen to her, Desmond. These are completely fake. She forged every single page to frame me. Helena gasped, clutching her pearls tightly against her chest. Forged. Yes, Preston shouted loudly, pacing the room with exaggerated outrage. Look at her. Look at how bitter she is. Zoe has spent her entire life seething with jealousy. She is a lonely, miserable woman who cannot stand the fact that Chloe married a successful white man from a prominent family. She wants to destroy my reputation because she knows she will never have a fraction of the happiness and societal respect we automatically receive. It was a complete masterclass in manipulation, and my parents swallowed it whole. The internalized hatred they harbored blinded them completely to the truth sitting right in front of their eyes. They craved validation from his elite world too much to ever see his obvious lies. How dare you frame your brother-in-law? Helena shrieked, her voice echoing off the mahogany walls. You are sick, Zoe. You are a twisted, vindictive girl. You always hated that Chloe got the life you desperately wanted. Desmond threw the bank statements back at me. They scattered across the carpeted floor like worthless trash. I will have you arrested for defamation, he roared. I will sue you until you do not have a single penny left to your name. You come in here trying to tear down the only good man your sister ever brought home just because you are jealous of his pedigree. Get out of my sight before I call the local police myself. I just looked at the three of them standing united behind a man who was actively robbing them blind every single day. They were so desperate to maintain their proximity to white privilege that they would rather crucify their own daughter than admit they had been played for absolute fools. There was no point in arguing with people deeply committed to their own financial destruction. I calmly picked up my expensive designer bag, leaving the forged documents scattered on the floor. I did not raise my voice in anger. I did not shed a single tear. I simply turned on my heel and walked out of the boardroom, the heavy wood door clicking shut behind me. The underground parking garage was incredibly cold and eerily quiet. My heels clicked loudly against the raw concrete as I walked toward my customized Maybach. I reached for the sleek silver door handle, but before I could pull it open, heavy hurried footsteps echoed rapidly behind me. A large hand clamped down incredibly hard on my right shoulder. Before I could react, Preston shoved me violently against the side of my luxury car. The sudden heavy impact knocked the breath completely out of my lungs. His face was inches from mine, and the polite country club gentleman facade was completely gone. In his place was a desperate, vicious man cornered by his own reckless lies. You think you are so remarkably smart? He spat, his breath hot against my face. You think because you bought a few cheap commercial properties you can finally sit at the big table with us. You are absolutely nothing, Zoe. You are just a ghetto street rat who got incredibly lucky. I stared back at him, refusing to break eye contact or show a single ounce of fear or intimidation. Remove your hand from my expensive jacket, Preston. He pressed his heavy forearm harder against my collarbone. You listen to me carefully, you arrogant piece of trash. My father plays golf with the state governor every weekend. My uncle appoints federal judges across this entire district. I have extremely powerful connections in this city that you cannot even fathom. If you ever say another word about those bank accounts, I will make one phone call and every single business license you hold in the state of Georgia will be permanently revoked by tomorrow morning. I will freeze your corporate assets, I will tie you up in endless costly litigation, and I will personally put you right back in the dirty gutter where you truly belong. His blue eyes were wild with unfiltered rage. He was banking heavily on the historical power dynamic. He fully expected the wealthy, connected white man to easily intimidate the black woman he viewed as utterly beneath his social standing. He honestly thought his aggressive threats would immediately make me cower and beg for his absolute mercy. I smiled, making Preston falter for a fraction of a second. I pulled out my phone, tapping a single button. Instantly, the parking garage security cameras directly above us flashed red. Smile for the FBI, Preston, I said. They are raiding your startup as we speak. Preston dropped his arm as if my jacket had suddenly caught fire. He stumbled backward, his expensive leather shoes scraping awkwardly against the concrete. His phone began vibrating violently in his pocket. He pulled it out, staring at the caller ID with wide, terrified eyes. I did not stay to watch him answer it. I simply slid into the plush leather seat of my Maybach, started the engine, and drove out of the parking garage, leaving him standing alone in the cold, damp shadows of his own collapsing empire. Furious and desperate, my family realized they could no longer intimidate me behind closed doors. They needed a public execution. Less than 24 hours later, my sister Chloe took to Instagram Live. She set her phone on the marble kitchen island of my parents' Buckhead mansion, ensuring the background looked perfectly affluent yet intimate. She wore no makeup, her hair was intentionally messy, and she had perfected the art of the trembling lower lip. "I am only speaking out because my family is in grave danger," Chloe told her thousands of followers, wiping away a single perfectly timed tear. My sister Zoe has completely lost her mind. She is actively committing elder abuse against our loving parents, trying to steal the estate they worked so hard to build. And now she is using her money to frame my innocent husband Preston for financial crimes he never committed. Chloe stared directly into the camera, her voice breaking with manufactured grief. Zoe has always been deeply jealous of my marriage and my happiness. She is a bitter, angry woman who is currently scamming our parents and destroying an innocent man's reputation just to punish us for loving each other. Please pray for my family. The video spread across Atlanta like a wildfire. Chloe weaponized her tears brilliantly, playing the ultimate victim and painting me as the ruthless corporate villain. The backlash was immediate and severe. By noon the next day, my real estate firm was trending on social media for all the wrong reasons. Local community groups organized a sudden boycott of my commercial properties. A crowd of angry protesters actually formed outside my main corporate office, holding cardboard signs accusing me of elder abuse and corporate bullying. My lead assistant, Marcus, rushed into my office looking visibly panicked as he peered through the blinds at the shouting crowd below. "Zoe, our public relations team is begging us to release a statement," he urged. "We are losing tenants. Investors are calling asking if the federal investigations into your father will somehow implicate our firm. We need to defend yourself against Chloe online immediately." I did not even look up from the commercial zoning maps spread across my desk. "Let them protest, Marcus. I do not fight battles on social media. I fight them in the bank." I remembered when I was 18, and my parents emptied my college fund to buy Chloe a sports car. When I threatened to call the police, they went to our church and told the entire congregation that I had a severe gambling problem and had stolen the money myself. They turned my own community against me to cover their tracks. I learned back then that arguing with liars is a massive waste of time. You do not defeat a smear campaign with an Instagram post. You defeat it by acquiring undeniable power. I closed my laptop and stood up, smoothing my tailored blazer. "Cancel my afternoon meetings, Marcus. I have an auction to attend." The downtown municipal building was packed with Atlanta elite real estate developers and local press. Everyone was there for the highly publicized auction of the West End commercial block. It was a massive prime piece of real estate. More importantly, it was the exact commercial block that housed my father's main corporate logistics center. Due to the FBI freezing several of his accounts because of Preston embezzlement, Desmond was drowning in sudden debt. His landlord had put the block up for public auction, and Desmond desperately needed to buy the building himself to secure a massive government contract and keep his business afloat. If he lost this property, his company would go completely under. I walked into the auction room just as the bidding was about to begin. Desmond was sitting in the front row, sweating profusely through his expensive suit. He was flanked by two extremely nervous-looking bankers. Helena sat beside him, twisting her rings anxiously. They had clearly leveraged every single favor and borrowed against every remaining asset they had just to be in this room. I took a seat in the back row, crossing my legs and raising my bidding paddle. The auctioneer started the bidding at $10 million. The room quickly turned into a brutal battlefield. Several developers dropped out at $15 million. By the time the price reached $20 million, it was just Desmond and a few corporate conglomerates left. Desmond raised his paddle, his hand shaking slightly. 22 million, he called out. It was a desperate bid. I could see his bankers wincing. He was putting up his absolute last borrowed dollar, risking total financial ruin for this one building. The auctioneer looked around the quiet room. 22 million going once. 22 million going twice. I casually raised my paddle high into the air. 25 million in cash. I said, my voice slicing through the heavy silence of the room. Desmond whipped his head around, his eyes widening in pure horror as he saw me sitting in the back row. He tried to stand up, but his banker pulled him back down, shaking his head rapidly. Desmond had absolutely nothing left to counter with. He was completely tapped out. 25 million in cash. The auctioneer repeated his gavel, striking the wooden block with a loud, definitive crack. Sold to the bidder in the back. The room erupted into shocked whispers. I stood up and walked calmly toward the exit. The local press corps was waiting just outside the double doors, eager for a quote about the auction and the ongoing FBI investigation into my family. Microphones were thrust into my face as cameras flashed around me. Zoe reporters shouted over each other. How does your family feel about the Instagram allegations? Are you concerned about the protests outside your office today? I stopped in front of the cameras, offering a bright, polished smile. I have no comment on social media drama, I said smoothly. But I do have a major business announcement for the city of Atlanta. I just officially purchased the West End commercial block in cash. I paused, letting the camera zoom in on my face. That means effective immediately I am the new landlord of my father's corporate headquarters. And unfortunately for him, I do not tolerate late rent. Camera flashes illuminated the courtyard as I walked to my car. News of my acquisition quickly dominated local business channels. Desmond Logistics' empire was effectively crippled. His corporate headquarters belonged to me, and his operating accounts remained firmly frozen by the federal government. He was a king without a castle, trapped in a financial vice of his own making. I was sitting in my penthouse later that evening, reviewing the new lease agreements when my private elevator chimed. The polished steel doors slid open, revealing my mother. Helena stepped into the living room, clutching a handbag like a shield. She bypassed the skyline view and marched toward my kitchen island. She did not look like a woman coming to apologize. She looked like a woman coming to collect a debt. Sign the property over to your father, she demanded, dropping transfer documents onto the counter. Do it right now, Zoe. Your moment of revenge is over. The company needs that building to survive the week. I did not reach for the papers. I kept my hands folded in my lap. I placed my phone face down, tapping a button on the side. You broke into my secure building to demand I hand over a $25 million asset for free, I asked, keeping my voice perfectly level. You owe us this. Helena snapped, her perfectly manicured fingers curling into fists. We put a roof over your head. We clothed you. We tried to make you presentable for polite society, but you fought us every single step of the way. You were always too dark, too loud, too independent. You refused to relax your natural hair, you refused to date the right kind of men, and you embarrassed us in front of the people who mattered. You owe us this building for putting up with you. Her words hung in the quiet air of the penthouse. It was the purest distillation of her maternal love, conditional, heavily steeped in colorism, and utterly toxic. She despised my dark skin and my unapologetic blackness, because it threatened her desperate need to assimilate into Preston elite white world. She thought my independence was an insult to the fragile social standing she had spent decades trying to secure. I reached out and flipped my phone over. The screen glowed brightly, showing a voice recording app actively capturing every single word. I pressed stop and saved the file to a secure cloud server, instantly protecting the asset. You just gave me the exact audio evidence I need to prove a documented history of financial and emotional abuse, I said smoothly. The federal prosecutors evaluating father business practices will find it fascinating how you view your own black daughter as a commodity to be exploited. Helena's face drained of all color. The haughty arrogance vanished, replaced by a sudden suffocating terror. You recorded me, she whispered, backing away from the island. I am a businesswoman, mother. I document every hostile negotiation. Now get out of my penthouse before I call security and have you arrested for trespassing. She practically ran to the elevator, her designer heels clicking frantically against the hardwood floors, until the heavy doors finally closed behind her. While Helena was busy trying to bully me into saving their crumbling empire, the real architect of their destruction was sitting in a sterile federal interrogation room. Preston had spent the last 48 hours watching the walls close in around him. The FBI had seized the servers at his fake tech startup. The digital paper trail linking him to the stolen $4 million was absolute. His powerful father had stopped returning his calls, realizing the federal magnitude of the crime. Preston knew he was facing 20 years in federal prison. But Preston also knew exactly how to weaponize his white privilege to escape any real consequences. Sitting across from two federal prosecutors, Preston slid a signed plea agreement across the metal table. He had dropped his arrogant demeanor, completely adopting the posture of an intimidated subordinate. He looked the prosecutors dead in the eye and delivered a masterclass in calculated deception. "Desmond forced me to do it." Preston lied, his voice trembling with manufactured regret. "He is a corrupt businessman who uses brutal intimidation tactics to run his logistics empire. He told me if I did not create those offshore shell companies and launder the money through my startup, he would destroy my career and force Chloe to divorce me." I was absolutely terrified of him. He fed right into the prosecutor's implicit biases. He painted Desmond as the aggressive criminal mastermind and himself as the innocent, naive white son-in-law who got caught up in a dangerous family syndicate. The prosecutors, eager to secure a massive conviction against a prominent Atlanta business owner, accepted the narrative without hesitation. Preston secured total immunity for himself by serving Desmond on a silver platter. The arrest warrant for my father was signed before the sun went down. Preston walked out of the federal building a free man, but he knew the immunity only protected him from prison. It did not protect him from the massive debts he owed to dangerous private investors who had backed his startup. He needed to disappear, and he needed cash to do it quickly. The heavy rain battered the floor-to-ceiling windows of my penthouse later that night. The glowing digital clock on my nightstand read 2 in the morning. I was fast asleep when a frantic, aggressive pounding echoed violently from my heavy front door. I grabbed my silk robe and walked cautiously to the entryway, checking the security monitor. My breath hitched. Chloe was standing in the hallway, completely drenched in rain. Her expensive designer clothes were violently torn. Her makeup was smeared across her cheeks, but what made me freeze was the massive purple bruise forming rapidly around her left eye. I opened the door. Chloe collapsed against the doorframe, sobbing hysterically, her entire body shaking with violent tremors. "Zoe, please, you have to help me!" Chloe screamed, her voice raw and panicked. Preston took everything. He emptied our joint checking accounts, our savings, the emergency fund. It is all gone. He beat me when I tried to stop him. He locked me out of the house and took my car. He is heading to the international airport right now, trying to flee the country. You have to stop him, Zoe, please. I pulled Chloe inside the penthouse, closing the heavy door against the raging storm. She collapsed onto the marble floor, shivering uncontrollably and sobbing into her hands. The golden child of our family, the woman who had spent her life looking down on me, was now reduced to a shivering mess on my entryway rug. I walked to the bathroom, retrieved a medical kit, and knelt beside her. "Hold still," I instructed, keeping my voice clinical. I cleaned the cut above her eye and pressed an ice pack against the swelling purple bruise on her cheekbone. "He took everything, Zoe," she gasped, her voice cracking. "He transferred the money to an untraceable account." He laughed at me when I begged him to stop. "I is going to the airport. You have to give me cash. I need $50,000 right now." I sat back on my heels, staring at her. Even battered and betrayed, her entitlement remained completely intact. "I am not giving you a single dollar," I said. Chloe dropped the ice pack, her eyes flashing with a sudden familiar anger. "Are you serious? I am your sister. My husband just beat me and robbed me blind. You have millions of dollars. Have your private jet fly me to Europe before the press finds out about this. You owe me protection. You still think you can snap your fingers and someone else will fix your messes," I said, standing up. "You married a parasite because you cared more about his country club pedigree than his character. I am not flying you to Paris, Chloe. I am giving you a front row seat to reality. Get up and put on a dry jacket. We are leaving. Where are we going? She demanded, clutching her torn clothes. Preston is not at the airport, I replied, checking my luxury watch. Men like him do not run from the law. They manipulate it. He is at the federal courthouse. A few hours later, the morning sun was just beginning to break over the Atlanta skyline. I drove my Maybach through the quiet downtown streets, pulling up to the imposing steps of the federal building. Chloe sat in the passenger seat wearing an oversized trench coat I had loaned her and massive dark sunglasses to conceal her bruised face. She was trembling. I guided her through the security checkpoints, flashing my credentials to the federal marshals. We walked down the echoing corridor toward courtroom 4B, where the preliminary hearing for our father was already underway. I pushed open the heavy wooden doors and we slipped into the back row of the gallery. The scene unfolding inside was a masterpiece of systemic manipulation. Desmond sat at the defense table looking like a broken man. Helena sat a few rows ahead of us, weeping silently. But my focus was entirely on the witness stand. Preston sat there looking like the absolute picture of respectable innocence. He wore a conservative navy suit, his hair neatly parted, his posture projecting a calm, cooperative demeanor. He was currently testifying under oath, utilizing the immunity deal he had secured the day before. Mr. Vance, the federal prosecutor, asked, pacing in front of the stand. Can you explain your role in the creation of these offshore accounts? Preston leaned toward the microphone, his expression earnest and deeply troubled. I was simply following orders from my father-in-law, Desmond. He is a very aggressive and intimidating man. He controlled every aspect of the corporate logistics empire. When I discovered the financial discrepancies, I tried to question him. He threatened me. He told me that if I did not route the $4 million through my startup company, he would utterly destroy my career. I explicitly threatened my physical safety and my marriage to his daughter. It was sickening to watch. Preston was perfectly weaponizing his white privilege, playing into every implicit bias the court might hold. He painted Desmond as the terrifying, corrupt black crime boss, and himself as the naive, civilized victim who was trapped in a dangerous situation. The judge nodded sympathetically as Preston spoke. Desmond's defense attorney looked completely helpless. I did not intervene immediately. I let Preston dig his grave as deep as possible. I let him perjure himself on the federal record, cementing his own absolute destruction. I gave a subtle nod to the aisle. My lead corporate attorney stepped through the courtroom doors carrying a sleek leather briefcase. He walked with immense purpose straight past the gallery and approached the prosecutor's side. He leaned down and whispered something urgent into the prosecutor's ear, handing him a small red USB drive. The prosecutor frowned, looking from the USB drive to my attorney. Your Honor, the prosecutor said, raising his hand. The state requests a brief recess. We have just been handed emergency supplemental evidence by a concerned party that directly contradicts the current testimony. Preston faltered. His confident posture stiffened as his eyes scanned the courtroom. He finally looked past the defense table and saw me sitting in the back row. I offered him a cold, razor-sharp smile. Beside me, Chloe slowly took off her oversized sunglasses, revealing the brutal purple bruise Preston had left on her face just hours ago. Preston's face drained of all color. He gripped the edges of the witness stand so hard his knuckles turned white. The judge granted a 10-minute recess. When court resumed, the atmosphere in the room had shifted from procedural to explosive. The prosecutor stood up, his face rigid with anger, holding a printed transcript of the audio file I had provided. Mr. Vance, the prosecutor, began, his voice echoing loudly in the tense room. Is it true you admitted on tape that you bled the family business dry to fund an app that does not even exist? Is it true you used racist slurs to intimidate your sister-in-law into silence? The courtroom erupted into shocked murmurs. Desmond whipped his head around, staring at Preston in pure disbelief. Helena gasped loudly, her hands covering her mouth. Preston stammered desperately. That audio is doctored. She is trying to frame me. The judge slammed his gavel down, silencing the room. The audio was verified by federal technicians during the recess, Mr. Vance. You deliberately lied under oath. You orchestrated the embezzlement yourself and attempted to use this court to frame an innocent party while securing your own protection. Immunity agreements, the judge continued, are strictly predicated on complete transparency. Since you have committed blatant perjury, your immunity deal is hereby revoked effective immediately. Bailiff, take this man into custody. Two armed federal marshals approached the witness stand, grabbing Preston by the arms. As they slapped the heavy metal cuffs onto his wrists, he locked eyes with me one last time. I did not blink. I simply watched the entitled, arrogant man who had terrorized my family get dragged out of the courtroom, stripped of every single privilege he thought made him untouchable. The heavy courtroom doors slammed shut behind the federal marshals, securing Preston's fate. The immediate aftermath was swift and brutally absolute. The financial ruin was absolute and irreversible. They had nothing left. The federal prosecutor formally withdrew all charges against Desmond, stating the audio evidence completely exonerated my father from any criminal conspiracy. Desmond slumped into his chair, weeping openly. But those were not tears of joyful relief. They were tears of utter financial devastation. The federal government released his accounts, but there was absolutely nothing left to unfreeze. Preston had efficiently drained every single corporate resource before his arrest, leaving Desmond Logistics' empire drowning in insurmountable debt. By Friday morning, the massive dominoes began to fall. The primary lending bank initiated immediate foreclosure proceedings on Desmond and Helena, $5 million Buckhead mansion, the crown jewel of their carefully curated high society identity, was scheduled for a public bank auction in less than 48 hours. I received the alert through my private equity firm, Automated Distressed Asset Tracker. The speed of their total downfall was truly breathtaking. Despite the glaring red foreclosure notices, literally taped to their custom mahogany front doors, my mother and sister remained completely paralyzed by their own profound delusion. According to my private security team, who were actively monitoring the property boundaries, Helena and Chloe had not packed a single cardboard box. I drove past the estate on Saturday evening and saw the massive crystal chandeliers blazing brightly through the front windows. They were sitting in the formal living room, sipping expensive champagne, acting as if the absolute collapse of their reality was just a temporary administrative glitch. They were drowning in denial, unable to accept that their precious societal status was evaporating into thin air. Chloe was frantically texting her friends, claiming the sudden arrest was a simple misunderstanding that Preston's powerful father, Richard Vance, would quickly resolve. Helena was right there, validating her daughter's toxic fantasies. She genuinely believed that the Vance family, the very epitome of old money, white privilege in Atlanta, would swoop in and pay off the multi-million-dollar mortgage simply to save face and preserve their elite social standing. They thought proximity to whiteness was an impenetrable shield. They completely forgot that to ruthless people like the Vances, a disgraced black family was entirely disposable the moment they stopped being useful and started becoming a massive public liability to their brand. The public foreclosure auction took place early Monday morning inside a stark, brightly lit municipal conference room. The atmosphere was completely devoid of the glamour my parents worshipped. I arrived early, blending into the back row, wearing a sharp black tailored suit and dark sunglasses. Desmond and Helena sat near the front row, clutching each other's hands tightly. They still looked incredibly expectant, waiting eagerly for their billionaire savior to arrive and fix everything. The heavy double doors opened, and Richard Vance strode into the room, accompanied by his aggressive legal team. He did not look like a man coming to rescue his struggling in-laws. He looked like a ruthless predator circling a wounded animal. Helena stood up quickly, attempting a desperate, relieved smile, but Richard walked straight past her, completely ignoring her outstretched hand. He took a seat on the exact opposite side of the aisle, radiating pure, arrogant disdain. I was not there to pay off their massive mortgage and save their dignity. He was there to buy the Buckhead mansion for absolute pennies on the dollar. He wanted to punish them publicly. He fully planned to formally evict the black family, who had supposedly tarnished his son's perfect reputation when the auctioneer took the podium and announced the property. Richard Vance immediately raised his paddle, offering a humiliatingly low starting bid of exactly $1.5 million. Desmond's face finally shattered as the cruel reality washed over him. He realized Richard was actively stealing his home right in front of his eyes. Helena let out a strangled sob, burying her face in her manicured hands. The auctioneer called out the low bid, scanning the quiet room for any other interested buyers. 1.5 million going. Once the auctioneer announced, his voice echoing off the cold municipal walls. Richard Vance smirked, adjusting his expensive tie, already tasting the victory of kicking my parents out onto the street. I stood up from my seat in the back row, taking off my dark sunglasses. My heels clicked sharply against the linoleum floor, drawing every single eye in the room. 5 million in cash. I stated, my voice calm and carrying absolute authority across the silent space. Richard Vance whipped his head around, his arrogant smirk, vanishing instantly. He stared at me, his face turning a dangerous shade of crimson red. He raised his paddle aggressively. 5.1 million, he barked loudly. I did not even break my stride as I walked down the center aisle. 6 million in cash, I countered smoothly, locking eyes with the billionaire who thought he owned this entire city. And I am fully prepared to escalate this bidding war until you completely drain your personal liquidity. Richard. Richard Vance lowered his paddle, his jaw clenched in furious defeat. He knew exactly who I was, and he knew I had the capital to bury him right here in this room. 6 million going twice. The auctioneer called out, his gavel raised high. Sold to the young woman in the center aisle. The heavy wooden gavel slammed down with a deafening crack, sealing the transaction instantly. My parents stared at me, their expressions paralyzed by a mixture of shock and sheer terror. Their entire world had just collapsed, and they were totally powerless to stop the devastating reality that was now crashing down upon them. This was the ultimate consequence of their lifelong obsession with status. I turned to face them, offering a cold, razor-sharp smile. I now officially owned my childhood home. My victory was absolute. Finally, the afternoon sun cast long golden shadows across the pristine marble floors of the Buckhead mansion. In the formal living room, Desmond, Helena, and Chloe sat arranged on the custom Italian leather sofas. They were drinking a vintage bottle of Bordeaux, acting as if the morning catastrophic public auction had been nothing more than a minor administrative error. The sheer density of their delusion was staggering. Chloe swirled the dark red wine in her crystal glass, her designer dress slightly wrinkled from the stress of the past few days. She confidently assured her parents that Preston father was simply playing a complex legal game. According to Chloe, Richard Vance had only let the auction proceed so he could restructure the family debt and hand the property deed right back to them. They nodded along, eagerly clinging to this fabricated reality. Helena even adjusted her pearl necklace, insisting that high society families always took care of their own behind closed doors. They genuinely believed their proximity to elite white wealth made them entirely untouchable. They refused to pack a single box. They refused to acknowledge that their reign over Atlanta high society was completely over. The heavy wrought iron gates at the front of the estate swung open smoothly. The gravel crunched loudly as my custom black Maybach rolled up the long winding driveway, followed immediately by two large black SUVs. I stepped out of the back seat, adjusting the lapels of my tailored blazer. 4 massive private security contractors stepped out of the trailing vehicles, flanking me instantly. I held a crisp white legal document in my right hand. The air was warm, but my focus was absolute ice. We walked up the grand sweeping staircase to the front entrance. I did not bother ringing the doorbell or using the heavy brass knocker. I simply handed the electronic access override code to my lead security chief. The heavy mahogany double doors clicked, unlocked, and swung open wide. The sound of our synchronized footsteps echoing across the marble foyer shattered the quiet atmosphere of their wine-soaked afternoon. Desmond stood up abruptly from the leather sofa, his wineglass sloshing dark red liquid onto the pristine white rug. Helena gasped, dropping her glass entirely. It shattered against the marble, sending sharp shards flying across the floor. Chloe jumped to her feet, her face twisting from confusion into immediate rage. "What the hell are you doing here?" Chloe shrieked, pointing a shaking finger at me and the 4 imposing security guards standing right behind me. "You cannot just break into our house. I am calling the police right now." Desmond puffed out his chest, trying to summon the old, intimidating authority he used to wield over me. "Get out of my house, Zoe!" He bellowed, his face flushing a dangerous shade of red. "I do not care what happened at the auction this morning. You have no legal right to barge in here with these hired thugs. Richard Vance is handling the property transfer. We are expecting a call from his legal team any minute to finalize the paperwork." I stopped in the center of the living room, looking around at the extravagant velvet curtains, the curated modern art pieces, and the towering stone fireplace. It was the exact room where they had told me I was an embarrassment to their legacy. It was the exact room where they had mocked my ambitions. I looked back at Desmond. "Richard Vance is not calling you," I said, my voice carrying cold, absolute authority across the large room. "Richard Vance left the municipal building and immediately drove to the airport. He is currently dealing with the federal prosecutors investigating his own massive banking fraud. He does not care about you. He never cared about you. You were nothing but useful pawns to his family, and the moment you became a public liability, you were entirely discarded." Helena's chest heaved as she struggled to pull air into her lungs. "That is a lie," she stammered, gripping the back of the sofa. "The Vances protect their own." "They do protect their own mother," I replied smoothly. "But you are not their own. You are just a disgraced family drowning in debt. And more importantly, you are currently trespassing." I raised my right hand, holding up the crisp white legal document. It bore the official seal of the state of Georgia and the bold black signature of a superior court judge. I tossed it casually onto the glass coffee table right next to their expensive bottle of wine. "You always told me I was not worthy of sleeping under your roof," I said, locking eyes with my father. "You told me my dark skin and my independence were a stain on your carefully crafted, elite image. You said I would never amount to anything without your precious trust fund. You were right about one thing, Desmond. I am not sleeping under your roof. You are now sleeping under mine." Desmond stared at the eviction notice, his hands shaking uncontrollably. "You have exactly 1 hour to vacate my property." I continued, checking my diamond watch. "You may take your personal clothing and basic toiletries. Every piece of furniture, every piece of art, and every vehicle parked in the garage now legally belongs to my private equity firm to offset the massive debts you owe. If you are not off these premises in exactly 60 minutes, my security team will physically remove you, and I will have you arrested for criminal trespassing." Chloe let out a blood-curdling scream of pure frustration. She lunged forward, trying to grab the eviction notice, but a security guard stepped smoothly in her path, forcing her back. "You cannot do this to us!" she wailed, her voice cracking wildly. "Where are we supposed to go? We have absolutely zero money. We have no credit cards. My husband is in federal custody. You are a monster, Zoe." I did not even look at her. My gaze remained fixed on Helena. My mother, the woman who had spent decades tearing down my self-esteem to feed her own narcissistic ego, finally understood the sheer magnitude of her defeat. Her knees buckled completely. She collapsed onto the marble floor right amidst the shattered glass and spilled wine. "Zoe, please," Helena sobbed hysterically, her hands reaching out toward my shoes. "Please have mercy on us. We are your family. I am your mother. You cannot throw us out onto the street like stray dogs. Please, I am begging you. We have absolutely nothing left. Do not do this to us." I looked down at the woman weeping at my feet. I reached into my blazer pocket and pulled out a small, crumpled white paper napkin. I crouched down gracefully, keeping my designer clothes far away from the spilled wine, and placed the napkin directly into her shaking hands. "I rented you an apartment," I said, my voice completely devoid of any emotion. "It is paid for the next 3 months. The address is written right there. It is the exact same roach-infested studio apartment you forced me to live in when you kicked me out into the street at 18. Enjoy your new lifestyle, mother." The ride to the south side of Atlanta was suffocatingly silent. Desmond had to order a cheap rideshare using a prepaid debit card because all their premium accounts were frozen tight. The driver dropped Desmond, Helena, and Chloe off in front of a crumbling brick apartment building. The neon sign above the entrance flickered violently, buzzing with a sound like dying insects. Helena stepped out onto the cracked, uneven pavement, her expensive designer heels sinking immediately into a puddle of stagnant brown water. She looked up at the rusted fire escapes, the broken windows, and the graffiti covering the exterior walls. This was not a temporary financial setback, this was rock bottom. Desmond dragged 2 black plastic garbage bags filled with the few clothes my security team had allowed them to pack. He did not say a single word. His shoulders slumped as they climbed 3 flights of stairs, reeking heavily of stale cigarette smoke and cheap bleach. When Desmond unlocked the door to Unit 4B, the stark reality of their new existence hit them with a brutal physical force. The apartment was a cramped, suffocating single room. Peeling yellow wallpaper hung in long, dirty strips from the ceiling. A single stained mattress lay directly on the bare floor next to a rusted kitchen sink. As Helena reached out and flipped on the overhead light, a massive swarm of roaches scattered aggressively across the cracked linoleum floor. Helena dropped to her knees, letting out a guttural wail of pure despair. She clutched her head, rocking back and forth on the dirty floor, completely losing her grip on reality. "I cannot live here," she screamed, her voice echoing off the thin walls. Desmond just sat heavily on the bare mattress, putting his face in his hands, weeping silently. He had absolutely no power left. Chloe refused to step past the doorway. She stood in the narrow hall, gripping her expensive purse, her knuckles turning white. She looked at her parents with absolute disgust. The people who had shielded her from every consequence her entire life were utterly useless now. Preston was sitting in a federal holding cell. His wealthy white family had completely erased them from existence. Chloe realized no one was coming to rescue her. If she wanted her luxury life back, she had to steal it herself. She paced the cramped hallway, her mind racing with desperate venom. Zoe had everything now, the money, the properties, the unyielding power. But Chloe knew that power relied heavily on data. My private equity firm had just acquired Desmond Logistics Empire, meaning the corporate servers housed massive portfolios containing highly sensitive client lists. If Chloe could get her hands on that proprietary data, she could easily sell it to my largest competitors for millions of dollars in untraceable offshore cash. It was the perfect ticket back into high society. Chloe just needed access to the building. She looked at her mother's purse discarded near the front door. Helena had kept a master override keycard for Desmond corporate headquarters. Zoe owned the building now, but Chloe bet that the old analog security protocols for the rear service elevators had not been fully updated yet. While Helena sobbed hysterically and Desmond stared blankly at the peeling wall, Chloe quietly reached into her mother bag and slipped the black plastic keycard deep into her coat pocket. The West End commercial block was deathly quiet at 2 in the morning. Chloe pulled her hood up over her head, shivering in the cold night air as she approached the rear loading dock of the massive glass building. Her hands shook violently as she swiped the stolen black card against the rusted service terminal. A sharp beep echoed in the empty alley, followed by the heavy mechanical click of the deadbolt releasing. Chloe slipped inside her heart, hammering wildly against her ribs. She navigated the dark concrete corridors, avoiding the main lobby and the modern security cameras, taking the service stairs all the way up to the executive floor. The thick carpet muffled her footsteps as she crept down the hallway toward the master server room. Her breathing was ragged. She felt a sick thrill of pure entitlement. She reached the heavy glass door of the server room and swiped the card one final time. The keypad flashed green. Chloe pushed inside the room, illuminated only by the blinking blue lights of the massive data racks. She pulled a high-capacity flash drive from her pocket and slid it into the primary terminal. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, bypassing the basic lock screen, using Desmond's old administrator credentials, which remarkably were still active. A progress bar appeared on the monitor, calculating the download of thousands of classified client portfolios. 10%, 20%. Chloe smiled, her bruised face twisting into a greedy, triumphant sneer. She was going to ruin me completely. She was going to sell this confidential data to buy her way back to the top. 50%. The progress bar crept forward, illuminating her desperate eyes. Then a deafening mechanical clack echoed through the room. The heavy steel door locked automatically behind her, sealing her inside. Chloe spun around, her breath catching sharply in her throat. The overhead fluorescent lights snapped on with a blinding, brutal flash, illuminating every single corner of the executive suite. Chloe threw her hands up, shielding her eyes from the sudden, intense glare. As her vision slowly cleared, She saw a large leather chair slowly swivel around in the center of the room. I was sitting there holding a delicate porcelain teacup, perfectly relaxed. I took a slow, deliberate sip, letting the heavy silence stretch until Chloe began to visibly tremble. I had intentionally left those old security credentials active, waiting to see exactly how long her entitlement would push her toward outright felony behavior. I set the teacup down on the polished mahogany desk, my gaze locking onto her terrified face. "Corporate espionage is a federal crime, Chloe," I said, my voice slicing through the cold air of the server room. Outside the thick glass window, the piercing shriek of police sirens suddenly erupted, cutting through the quiet Atlanta night. The flashing red and blue lights painted the walls of the office, reflecting brightly off Chloe's horrified expression. 4 armed Atlanta police officers suddenly threw open the heavy steel door of the server room. They burst into the executive suite with their weapons drawn and tactical flashlights cutting through the ambient blue glow of the data racks. Chloe stumbled backward, hitting the master terminal edge. She raised her hands defensively, her chest heaving wildly as the lead officer ordered her to step away from the keyboard and keep her hands visible. I remained still in my leather chair, taking another calm sip of my tea. "Officer," I said, clearly projecting my voice over the chaotic shouting. "This woman used stolen credentials to bypass the building perimeter. The flash drive inserted into that terminal contains proprietary corporate data she was actively attempting to steal." Chloe lunged forward, pointing a shaking finger at me. "She set me up," she screamed, her voice shrill and desperate, echoing off the walls. "She left the credentials active on purpose to trap me. You are a monster, Zoe. You deliberately set your own sister up to go to a federal prison." I stood up slowly, smoothing the front of my tailored blazer. "I did not force you to break into my commercial building, Chloe. I did not force you to initiate a massive data breach to sell out my private clients. Your endless entitlement led you right into this room." I turned to the lead officer and handed him a secondary tablet. "This contains the uncut security footage from the alleyway, the stairwell, and this exact room. You will also find the digital footprint of the illegal download she just initiated." The officer nodded sharply, signaling his tactical team. 2 officers grabbed Chloe by the arms, forcing them aggressively behind her back. The sharp metallic click of the heavy handcuffs echoed loudly in the quiet server room. Chloe thrashed wildly, kicking her expensive designer shoes against the data racks. "Call Mom and Dad," she wailed as they dragged her toward the exit. "Call them right now. They will destroy you for this, Zoe." I watched her being hauled out of the building. She was entirely broken, but still clinging to the pathetic illusion that our parents had any power left to wield in this city. Less than 2 hours later, I was sitting in the private conference room of the downtown police precinct. The fluorescent lights buzzed obnoxiously overhead. Desmond and Helena rushed into the room accompanied by a cheap, exhausted public defender. They looked incredibly tired and completely disheveled, having come straight from the roach-infested apartment I had rented for them. Helena threw herself across the metal table, grasping frantically at my hands. "Zoe, please," she begged, hot tears streaming down her ruined makeup. "You cannot let them charge your sister with a federal crime. She will not survive a single day in a federal prison. We are so incredibly sorry for everything we have done to you over the years. We realize now that we were entirely wrong about you." Desmond stood behind her, nodding rapidly, his posture hunched. "We will do absolutely anything, Zoe. We just want to be a real loving family again. We will go to family therapy. We will make immediate amends. Just tell them trying to crush my spirit." Their apologies were entirely manufactured. They did not care about being a real family. They only cared about keeping their golden child out of a bright orange jumpsuit. "I am perfectly willing to drop the federal espionage charges," I said, my voice dropping to a cold whisper. Helena let out a massive sigh of profound relief, but I immediately raised my hand to stop her. "However, my mercy comes with strict, non-negotiable conditions." I pulled a thick legal binder from my briefcase and pushed it across the table toward their public defender. "You are going to sign a legally binding non-disclosure agreement," I instructed. "You will permanently relinquish any and all future claims to my personal assets, my corporate holdings, and my estate. If you ever attempt to sue me or demand financial support, again, this agreement dictates that Chloe's immediate federal prosecution will resume." Desmond swallowed hard, looking at the dense legal paperwork. "We can sign that," he muttered softly. "I am not finished," I continued. "The second condition is entirely public. You used your country club friends and your elite social circle to run a vicious smear campaign against me. You went on television and accused me of elder abuse. You are going to fix that today." Helena's eyes widened with sudden dread. "What exactly do you want us to do, Zoe?" "I want a public confession," I said, leaning forward. "I have drafted a detailed formal statement. You and Desmond will sign it and publish it across all your social media platforms. You will also send it directly to the Oakmont Country Club Board of Directors and the local press. The statement explicitly confesses that you two were the actual masterminds behind the embezzlement. It states that you framed me to cover your tracks, and that you fully orchestrated the public smear campaign to hide your own massive financial crimes." Helena gasped, covering her mouth. "You are asking us to completely destroy our own reputation. We will be social pariahs in Atlanta. No one will ever speak to us again." "You are already social pariahs, Mother," I replied flatly. "But right now, you are trying to hide behind my name to salvage whatever scraps of dignity you think you have left. You will clear my name completely and definitively. You will take the exact public humiliation you tried to force onto me. That is the absolute price of your daughter's freedom. Sign the papers, or I walk out that door, and Chloe goes to a federal penitentiary for the next decade." Desmond's hands shook violently as he grabbed the pen from the table. He looked at Helena, who was sobbing uncontrollably into her hands. They had absolutely no other choice. They had finally run out of pawns to sacrifice. Desmond signed his name on the dotted line, followed immediately by Helena. They officially traded the last shred of their high society illusion to keep Chloe out of a jail cell. I gathered the documents, sliding them neatly back into my briefcase. The victory was absolute. They had legally and publicly neutralized themselves. Just as I stood up to leave the interrogation room, my cell phone began to ring loudly in my pocket. I checked the caller ID. It was an incoming call routed directly from the maximum security federal holding facility where Preston was currently awaiting trial. I accepted the call, pressing the phone to my ear. Zoe Preston's voice crackled through the terrible connection. He sounded completely terrified, his breathing ragged and wet. "You have to help me. I tried to run a hustle on some guys in my cell block. They found out I was a fake. They beat me, Zoe. They broke my ribs, and they are threatening to kill me if I do not pay them $50,000 by tonight. You have the money. You have to pay them right now." I paused silently, listening to the desperate, bleeding man on the other end of the line. He still believed his white privilege could compel me to save him. I ended the call without giving him a single word of comfort. 48 hours later, I walked into the federal maximum security holding facility. The harsh fluorescent lights buzzed obnoxiously above me, casting long, cold shadows against the sterile concrete walls. The cold air smelled strongly of industrial bleach and quiet despair. I wore a pristine white tailored suit paired with expensive diamond studs, a stark and deliberate contrast to the grim reality of the prison visitation room. A heavy steel door clanked open at the far end of the hall, and two armed guards escorted Preston into the room. The sight of him was almost jarring. The arrogant man who used to strut through exclusive country clubs in expensive pastel polos, boasting about his untouchable pedigree, was completely gone. He wore an oversized bright orange jumpsuit that swallowed his frame, making him look incredibly small and utterly insignificant. His right eye was swollen shut, a dark purple bruise blooming aggressively across his cheekbone and down his jawline. He walked with a noticeable painful limp, his shoulders hunched in pure terror. He sat down heavily in the metal chair across from me, separated by a thick pane of reinforced plexiglass. He picked up the black telephone receiver with violently trembling hands. I picked up my receiver, keeping my expression entirely neutral. "Zoe, thank God you came!" Preston breathed, his voice cracking with intense desperation. "You have to get me out of here. These people, they do not care who my father is. They do not care about my background or my connections. My family name means absolutely nothing in this cell block. They cornered me in the recreation yard yesterday morning. I need $50,000 deposited into my commissary account immediately, or they will kill me." I stared at him, watching the sheer panic radiate from his battered face. The man who had spent years mocking my blackness and flaunting his unearned superiority was now begging for his life behind bars. I need a private defense attorney. Preston continued pressing his sweaty forehead against the thick glass, leaving a greasy smudge. The public defender they assigned me is completely useless. He just wants me to take a plea deal for 20 years. If you pay for my legal team, I will give you everything. I know you hate my father. I know Richard treated your family like garbage and looked down on your business. I have hard, irrefutable evidence of his illegal redlining practices. I have the hidden ledgers, showing how he routinely denied commercial loans to minority business owners to artificially inflate his own real estate portfolio. I can hand you the absolute destruction of the Vance empire on a silver platter. He tried to summon his old charming persona, forcing a pathetic, desperate smile that made his split lip bleed slightly. I always knew you were the smart one, Zoe. Chloe was just a superficial trophy away for me to access your father's bank accounts, but you have real genuine power. We could be incredible partners. Just wire the money to my lawyer right now, and I will give you the keys to my father's entire kingdom. I let a cold, sharp laugh escape my lips. The sound echoed clearly through the heavy plastic receiver, cutting through his pathetic attempts at manipulation. You think you still have leverage, Preston? I asked, my voice dripping with absolute pity. You think you are sitting at a negotiation table bargaining for your survival. Let me educate you on how real power actually operates in the real world. I leaned forward, resting my elbows lightly on the metal counter, ensuring my diamond ring caught the harsh prison lighting. I do not need your hidden ledgers or your pathetic attempts at familial betrayal. I already have them. Preston's forced smile vanished instantly, replaced by profound, deepening confusion. While you were busy getting beaten to a pulp in the recreation yard, I was busy in the boardroom, I explained smoothly. I took the audio recording of your perjury, the one where you admitted to defrauding my father, and I sent it to every single major shareholder in Richard Vance Holding Company. I then provided the federal investigators with the exact offshore routing numbers you used to hide the stolen funds. Your father's stock plummeted by 60% in 48 hours. I was facing a massive liquidity crisis and sudden intense federal scrutiny. Preston's eyes widened in sheer horror as the reality of his family's total collapse washed over him. I did not stop there. I continued, my tone completely ruthless and devoid of any mercy. I organized a hostile takeover using my private equity firm. I bought up the majority voting shares of the Vance empire for absolute pennies on the dollar while the board was panicking. I own your family legacy now. Your father is currently fighting to avoid federal indictment himself. He has officially disowned you publicly to save his own skin and distance himself from your felony charges. He is not coming for you, Preston, and he has absolutely no empire left for you to leverage. You are completely and utterly alone. Preston dropped the phone receiver. It dangled by its metal cord, banging loudly against the plexiglass window. He put his bruised face in his trembling hands, sobbing heavily with the crushing weight of total irreversible defeat. The white privilege he had wielded as a weapon his entire life had been completely neutralized. I picked up my receiver and tapped my manicured fingernail against the glass, sharply demanding his immediate attention. He slowly lifted his head, tears streaming down his battered cheeks, mixing with the blood from his split lip. I did not come here to help you, Preston. I whispered into the phone, making sure he heard every single syllable clearly. I came to tell you that my private equity firm just bought this federal prison private catering and commissary contract. Enjoy the food. Leaving Preston to digest his reality inside the prison. My phone vibrated before I even reached my luxury car. The Vance family patriarch Richard had officially declared war. Furious over my hostile takeover of his holding company, Richard leveraged his massive political connections and media influence to launch a vicious smear campaign against me across every major news network in Atlanta. He immediately resorted to the oldest weapon in his arsenal, racist dog whistles. Sitting comfortably in my Maybach, I watched a live broadcast on my tablet. Richard Vance stood at a polished podium surrounded by conservative commentators. He looked directly into the camera, his face flushed with manufactured righteous indignation. This aggressive acquisition is nothing but a targeted malicious attack by a thug corporate raider, he declared, his voice trembling with fake outrage. Zoe is an unethical opportunist who uses street tactics to intimidate legitimate legacy businesses today. She represents a dangerous, uncultured element destroying the respectable foundations of our great city. I was trying to trigger the implicit biases of his white investors, painting me as an angry black woman who cheated her way into their boardroom. Marcus called immediately, sounding anxious about the shifting media narrative. "Let him talk now, Marcus," I said smoothly. "Arrogance is very loud, but hard evidence is deafening. Book the grand ballroom at the St. Regis Hotel tomorrow. Tell them I am hosting a transparent financial review of the Vance family legacy." The next morning, the St. Regis Grand Ballroom was packed to capacity. The crystal chandeliers illuminated rows of eager journalists and skeptical financial analysts. Richard Vance spent the last 24 hours dragging my name through the mud, unaware he handed me the exact audience I needed to bury him permanently. I stepped up to the microphone wearing a striking crimson blazer that projected absolute authority. The room fell silent save for the rapid clicking of camera shutters. "Richard Vance recently called me a thug, corporate raider who does not respect legacy businesses," I began, my voice carrying clearly across the room. "So I decided to conduct a forensic audit of the exact legacy he is so desperate to protect. Yesterday, my private equity firm acquired the controlling interest in Vance Holdings. As the new majority shareholder, I gained unrestricted access to decades of internal corporate communications, private ledgers, and unredacted risk assessment portfolios. What I found was not a respectable legacy. It was a highly coordinated, systematic criminal enterprise." The screen lit up with scanned internal documents featuring Richard Vance's signature. "These documents display a deliberate, decades-long strategy of aggressive redlining across Atlanta," I explained. "Richard Vance built his billion-dollar real estate empire systematically denying commercial loans and property acquisitions to qualified minority business owners. Hun specifically targeted black neighborhoods, intentionally suppressing property values, buying distressed assets for pennies, and locking black developers out of the subsequent gentrification profits." I pressed another button, bringing up a new set of highly classified emails. Furthermore, I continued, my tone remaining dangerously calm. "Here is direct written proof that Richard Vance personally instructed his loan officers to artificially inflate interest rates for black applicants, utilizing a secret internal coding system to bypass federal fair housing regulations. This is not a business legacy. This is generational theft, and it ends today." The explosion was instantaneous. I handed out bound folders to the front row containing every piece of irrefutable forensic evidence. Within exactly 15 minutes, the news broke on every major national financial network. The narrative completely flipped from my supposed thuggery to the largest corporate civil rights violation scandal in modern Georgia history. The financial markets reacted with brutal efficiency. The moment the indisputable evidence of systemic racial discrimination hit the public wire, institutional investors panicked. Massive pension funds and ethical investment coalitions began dumping their shares of any remaining Vance-affiliated subsidiaries. I watched the stock tickers on the monitors in the back of the room plummet in real time. The ultimate death blow came exactly 2 hours later. The Department of Justice issued a sudden emergency press release. Based on the overwhelming forensic evidence I provided, federal prosecutors announced an immediate investigation into Richard Vance and his executive board for systemic financial discrimination, racketeering, and federal banking fraud. Richard Vance had spent his entire life using his wealth to crush people who looked like me. Now his own hubris had provided the exact weapon I needed to dismantle his empire brick by brick. Later that afternoon, Richard Vance was summoned to the federal courthouse for an emergency injunction hearing regarding his frozen assets. The building was completely surrounded by aggressive reporters, angry community members, and relentless paparazzi. I watched the live news feed from the comfort of my penthouse. Richard walked out of the heavy courthouse doors looking like a completely broken old man. His expensive suit hung loosely on his frame and he was sweating heavily. A swarm of reporters shoved microphones into his face, shouting questions about the redlining documents and the impending federal indictment. "Mr. Vance," one reporter yelled over the chaotic crowd, Does your son Preston's sudden arrest for embezzlement relate to this culture of corporate fraud? Are you going to help him fight his federal charges? Richard Vance stopped on the courthouse steps, his eyes darting wildly. He realized the ship was sinking fast and he needed to shed any excess weight to survive. He looked directly into the camera lenses, his face twisting with panicked self-preservation. I have absolutely no knowledge of my son, past criminal activities, Richard declared, his voice cracking under the intense public pressure. Preston acted entirely alone in this. He disgraced this family, and I am fully cooperating with the authorities regarding his embezzlement case. I have officially severed all ties with him. He is no longer my son. The cameras captured every single word of the ultimate betrayal. Richard Vance had just publicly disowned his own flesh and blood to buy himself a few more minutes of freedom, leaving Preston completely and utterly abandoned to rot in a federal cell. The total collapse of the Vance empire sent a brutal shockwave straight down into the roach-infested apartment where my parents were currently suffocating in their new reality. Helena had spent exactly 4 days trapped inside the humid, cramped single room. She was entirely stripped of her country club lunches, her weekly spa treatments, and the social insulation that had protected her entire existence. The cheap linoleum floor and peeling yellow wallpaper broke whatever fragile grip she still had on her sanity. She refused to accept that her exile was permanent. She needed a way out, and she decided to weaponize the only thing she had left: her own mortality. It started on a Tuesday evening. Desmond was sitting on the stained mattress eating a $1 menu burger when Helena suddenly clutched her chest. She let out a piercing, dramatic scream, collapsing onto the dirty floor and gasping violently for air. Desmond panicked completely. He dialed emergency services, screaming that his high society wife was having a massive cardiac event. He fully expected the ambulance to whisk them away to the prestigious private cardiac ward at Emory University Hospital, where they used to donate heavily for social clout. Instead, the paramedics dragged Helena down the grim concrete stairs and rushed her straight to the severely underfunded county public hospital. My phone rang at midnight. The caller ID flashed Desmond's name. I let it ring twice before answering. Zoe, you have to come down here right now. Desmond sobbed into the receiver, his voice breaking with manufactured desperation. Your mother suffered a massive heart attack. We are trapped in this awful county hospital surrounded by vagrants. The doctors here are completely incompetent. They say her arteries are failing. She needs an immediate emergency bypass surgery that costs $200,000, or she will not survive the night. Please, Zoe, I am begging you. Forget everything that has happened between us. Write the check and transfer her to a private luxury facility right now. She is dying. I listened to his frantic pleading. 10 years ago, a call like this would have sent me rushing blindly into the night, terrified of losing my mother. I would have drained my own accounts just to prove my worth to them. But trauma is an excellent educator. I knew exactly how Helena operated. She had once faked a severe nervous breakdown just to avoid attending my high school graduation because she wanted to go to a wine tasting in Savannah with her elite friends instead. I knew she was entirely capable of faking a lethal medical emergency just to extort me for a luxury hospital suite and a hefty cash payout. I am on my way, I said, my voice completely devoid of any panic. I did not go to the hospital alone. I made one swift phone call to the chief medical officer of my private concierge health team. Dr. Eris Thorne was a leading cardiovascular surgeon in Atlanta whose retainers were paid exclusively by billionaires. He met me at the sliding glass doors of the crowded, chaotic public emergency room. The waiting area was packed with exhausted people, harsh fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. Desmond spotted me walking down the crowded corridor. He rushed forward, his clothes wrinkled, his eyes wide and bloodshot. Zoe! Thank God you are here, he cried, trying to grab my shoulders. I sidestepped his grasp smoothly. He pointed toward a curtained triage bay at the end of the hall. She is fading fast, Zoe. The surgery requires a $200,000 upfront deposit because we do not have our premium insurance anymore. You have to save her. I did not pull out my checkbook. I did not shed a single tear. I simply turned to the man standing right beside me. Dr. Thorne, please evaluate the patient I instructed. Desmond frowned, stepping back in confusion. Who is this? This is my private chief of cardiology, I replied coldly. I brought him here to verify exactly what kind of $200,000 surgery my mother requires tonight. Desmond's face instantly drained of all color. Wait, you cannot just bring outside doctors in here, he stammered nervously, trying to block the curtain. The county doctors already made the diagnosis. Dr. Thorne ignored Desmond completely. He pushed past the thin fabric curtain, flashing his elite medical credentials at the exhausted ER attending physician. The public hospital doctor immediately handed over the chart, the blood work results, and the printed EKG scans. Helena was lying on the stiff hospital bed, an oxygen mask resting loosely over her face. She groaned dramatically, clutching her chest and squeezing her eyes shut, playing the role of a dying matriarch to absolute perfection. Dr. Thorne studied the charts for exactly 2 minutes. He flipped through the blood work results and examined the electrical rhythms on the EKG printouts. His professional expression hardened into sheer irritation. He handed the clipboard back to the attending physician and turned to face me and Desmond. There is absolutely no arterial blockage, Dr. Thorne announced, his deep voice carrying clearly across the busy emergency room bay. Her troponin levels are completely normal. Her EKG shows a perfectly healthy rhythm for a woman her age. She does not need a $200,000 bypass surgery. Helena stopped groaning. Her eyes snapped open, darting furiously toward the doctor. What is wrong with her then? I asked, crossing my arms. Dr. Thorne adjusted his glasses. She has severe acid reflux and severe indigestion, likely from consuming highly processed, cheap takeout food that her stomach is not accustomed to digesting. Her heart is perfectly fine. She needs an antacid, not a surgical team. The silence in the triage bay was absolutely deafening. The ER attending physician glared at her, realizing she had tied up a critical emergency bed with a fabricated performance. Desmond stared at the linoleum floor, his chest heaving as his extortion plot spectacularly collapsed. You are going to steal $200,000 from me, I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. You are going to use your own fake death to manipulate me into funding your escape from the apartment. You dragged me out of my home in the middle of the night, playing on the very last shred of basic human decency you thought I had left for you. You really thought your performance would break my boundaries and hand you a blank check. Zoe, please. Helena scrambled to sit up on the stiff hospital bed, tossing the useless oxygen mask aside. We just needed a way out. That apartment is a living nightmare. We cannot survive like this. We just need a little bit of capital to get back on our feet. You have hundreds of millions of dollars. You would not even miss it. Your father and I are desperate. I looked at the woman who gave birth to me. I looked at the man who had enabled her cruelty my entire life. I felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no sadness, just a cold, profound emptiness. The final fragile thread binding me to these people snapped permanently. I reached into my designer handbag and pulled out the crisp white invoice the hospital administration had printed at the front desk. I dropped the paper directly onto Helena's lap. You wasted emergency county resources, Mother, I said, staring down at her. That is your public hospital emergency room bill. It comes to exactly $5,000. I suggest you get a job to pay it off because I am completely done paying for your existence. I turned my back on them and walked out of the sliding glass doors into the cool Atlanta night air, severing the very last emotional cord I had tying me to my parents. While I walked out of that public emergency room, leaving my parents to their self-inflicted financial ruin, my sister was sitting in a grim municipal courtroom facing her own brutal reality. I had kept my promise to drop the federal corporate espionage charges, but my mercy did not extend to state law. The local district attorney aggressively pursued misdemeanor charges for breaking and entering along with criminal trespassing. Chloe stood before a county judge wearing a cheap off-the-rack suit because her designer wardrobe had been completely liquidated to pay her initial legal retainer. She wept openly during her sentencing, fully expecting the judge to grant her leniency because of her formerly pristine social status. The judge was entirely unmoved. He handed her a mountain of community service hours, 3 years of strict probation, and a massive court-mandated restitution fine. Without Preston's stolen money to hide behind and with Desmond and Helena completely bankrupt, Chloe was suddenly thrust into a terrifying new world. She had absolutely no marketable skills. Her entire adult life had been spent attending exclusive brunches, maintaining her socialite image, and looking down on working-class people. Now she was legally required to maintain verifiable employment or face immediate jail time for violating her probation. She applied to high-end boutiques and luxury concierge services, but her highly publicized arrest record made her completely unemployable in the elite sectors of Atlanta. Desperation forced her hand. She needed a paycheck, and she needed it instantly to keep a roof over her head. That desperation led her right back to the one place she used to consider her second home, the Oakmont Country Club. Chloe walked into the service entrance of the club completely stripped of her previous arrogance. She met with Mr. Sterling, the same black general manager she and Preston had aggressively tried to get fired just a few months ago. The irony was suffocating. Mr. Sterling reviewed her mandated employment forms with total professional detachment. He did not mock her. He did not gloat. He simply handed her a standard employee handbook and a uniform wrapped in plastic. Chloe was assigned to the banquet service staff. The golden child of our family, the woman who used to snap her fingers to summon waiters, was now required to wear a stiff black vest, a starched white button-down shirt, and a modest knee-length skirt. She had to pin her hair back and carry a silver serving tray for $10 an hour plus tips. A month into her new reality, I scheduled a massive philanthropic event at Oakmont. I was hosting an exclusive networking luncheon and grant distribution ceremony for 100 of the most successful Black female entrepreneurs in Georgia. I transformed the grand ballroom into a celebration of Black excellence, power, and sisterhood. It was a space designed entirely to uplift the very women my parents and Preston had spent their lives trying to exclude. I arrived at the ballroom wearing a stunning custom-tailored emerald green dress that commanded the room. I spent the first hour greeting tech founders, venture capitalists, and brilliant creative directors. We shared stories of overcoming systemic barriers and celebrated our collective financial independence. The atmosphere was electric, charged with genuine joy and mutual respect. I stood near the center of the room, holding court entirely in my element, surrounded by supportive, powerful peers. I knew Chloe was on the schedule to work the event. Mr. Sterling had informed me of her employment weeks ago. I did not ask him to fire her, and I did not ask him to reassign her. I simply let reality dictate the terms of her existence. If she wanted to earn an honest living, she could do so on my payroll. Chloe emerged from the swinging kitchen doors, carrying a heavy tray loaded with crystal champagne flutes. Her face was flushed from the heat of the industrial kitchen, and her uniform was slightly rumpled. She kept her head down, avoiding eye contact with the affluent women filling the room. She navigated through the crowd, offering drinks with a tight, forced smile. Every step she took was an agonizing reminder of everything she had lost. She was serving the exact demographic she had been taught to view as vastly inferior. I was engaged in a deep conversation with a prominent banking executive when I saw Chloe approaching our circle out of the corner of my eye. Her knuckles were white as she gripped the edges of the heavy silver tray. She stared directly at my emerald green dress, her eyes dark with a toxic, boiling resentment. She could not stomach the sight of my absolute triumph. She could not accept that the sister she had relentlessly bullied and discarded was now a celebrated billionaire while she was passing out drinks for minimum wage to survive. Chloe stepped closer to my group, her breathing hitched. Instead of gracefully offering the tray, she suddenly accelerated her pace. She performed a highly calculated, clumsy stumble, deliberately twisting her ankle inward. She let out a fake gasp of surprise, violently jerking the silver tray forward with both hands. 5 crystal flutes filled to the brim with expensive vintage champagne toppled over instantly. The sticky, sparkling liquid splashed directly across the front of my custom emerald dress, soaking the expensive silk fabric completely. The glasses hit the polished wooden floor, shattering into dozens of sharp, jagged pieces around my designer heels. The vibrant hum of the ballroom vanished in an instant. 100 powerful women stopped talking simultaneously, turning their heads to witness the sudden disruption. The music seemed to fade into the background. The silence was so heavy you could hear the champagne dripping from my soaked hemline. The entire grand ballroom went dead silent, waiting to see exactly how I would react to the disgraced sister standing over my ruined dress. 100 successful Black female founders, venture capitalists and executives stared at the shattered crystal and the dripping emerald silk. They waited for the inevitable explosion. Chloe stood frozen, her chest heaving, a mixture of terror and vindictive satisfaction twisting her bruised features. She expected me to scream. She desperately wanted me to lose my composure to validate her delusion that I was still the angry, unrefined sister our parents had always claimed I was. I did not give her what she wanted. I did not raise my voice. I did not even flinch. I calmly reached for a crisp, white linen napkin from a nearby catering station. With slow, deliberate movements, I dabbed the expensive champagne from the bodice of my custom dress. The silence in the grand ballroom was absolute, broken only by the soft rustle of silk and linen. I handed the damp napkin back to a passing attendant and finally locked eyes with my older sister. I did not look at her with anger. I looked at her with pure, unadulterated pity. "Is this all you have left, Chloe?" I asked, my voice carrying clearly across the quiet room, spilling drinks like a petulant child. The question struck her like a physical blow. The malicious satisfaction instantly drained from her face, leaving behind a hollow, terrified shell. The stark contrast between us had never been more glaring. I stood surrounded by an empire I had built with my own two hands, while she stood shivering in a rumpled uniform, clutching an empty silver serving tray. Chloe dropped the tray. It hit the hardwood floor with a loud, discordant clang. She sank to her knees right in the middle of the shattered crystal glass, burying her face in her hands, and began to sob. It was not her usual performative weeping. It was a guttural, ugly, desperate sound of total psychological collapse. "I have nothing," Chloe wailed, her voice cracking as she rocked back and forth on the floor. "I have absolutely nothing left. They ruined me, Zoe. Mom and Dad ruined me." The affluent women around us watched in stunned silence as the former golden child completely unraveled. "They made me into a fragile trophy." Chloe cried, the words pouring out of her in a frantic public confession. "They told me I never had to work, that my only job was to look pretty and marry a wealthy white man to secure our family's status. They stripped away my ambition before I even knew what it was. They made me totally dependent on them and on Preston. And now Preston is in federal prison, Mom and Dad are completely bankrupt, and I do not even know how to survive. I am completely hollow inside. I do not know how to pay a basic utility bill. I do not know how to create a spreadsheet. I do not know how to do anything except serve drinks and beg for mercy." The raw honesty of her breakdown laid bare the toxic reality of our parents' parenting. They had relentlessly punished me for my independence, but they had effectively crippled Chloe with their suffocating enablement. They had turned her into a helpless porcelain doll, and the moment she was dropped into the real world, she shattered into a million irreparable pieces. Several women in the crowd shifted uncomfortably, a few stepping forward, as if to offer the weeping woman a comforting hand. I raised my palm, stopping them instantly. This was not a moment for coddling. Coddling was exactly what had destroyed her. I looked down at Chloe kneeling amidst the broken glass and spilled champagne. She looked up at me with red, swollen eyes, desperately waiting for me to either forgive her or fire her. She wanted me to rescue her from the humiliation or give her a reason to play the victim again. I refused to do either. "I am not going to fire you, Chloe," I said, my voice devoid of any warmth or maternal comfort. "But I am certainly not going to comfort you. The real world does not care about your tears, and it does not care about your sudden self-awareness. You are on the clock, and you have a massive mess on the floor." I stepped over the broken crystal, my emerald dress flowing behind me. "Clean it up and get back to work." I did not look back as I walked to the podium to deliver my keynote address. I left her kneeling on the floor, forced to literally sweep up the mess she had intentionally created, while the women she once considered beneath her watched her work. It was a brutal, necessary lesson in accountability, the very first one she had ever received in her 34 years of life. The networking luncheon was a massive success. Despite the damp stain on my dress, I commanded the room, securing millions in new commitments for my business initiatives. When the event finally concluded late in the afternoon, I felt a deep, satisfying sense of accomplishment. I had officially reclaimed my narrative in the very space that used to reject me. I exited the Oakmont Country Club through the grand front doors, stepping out into the warm Atlanta evening. The valet immediately brought my Maybach around to the pristine circular driveway. I reached for the chrome door handle, eager to return to my penthouse and celebrate the victory. Zoe. A man stepped out from behind a large marble pillar near the entrance. He was wearing a cheap, ill-fitting suit and carrying a thick manila envelope. He did not look like club security, and he certainly did not look like a guest. My private security detail instantly stepped forward, moving to intercept him, but the man quickly raised his hands in a non-threatening gesture. "I am just doing my job, he said quickly, tossing the thick envelope directly at my feet. "You have been officially served." I signaled my security team to stand down. I stared at the envelope resting on the pristine cobblestone driveway. Slowly, I bent down and picked it up. I broke the seal and pulled out the dense stack of legal documents. My eyes scanned the bold black text on the first page, and a harsh, humorless laugh escaped my lips. It was a formal lawsuit filed in the Fulton County Superior Court. The plaintiff was Desmond. My bankrupt, disgraced father, who was currently living in a roach-infested slum on my dime, was officially suing me for $50 million. The sheer audacity of the lawsuit was breathtaking. Desmond had hired a predatory contingency lawyer to claim that my completely legal acquisition of his bankrupt logistics company and the subsequent eviction from the foreclosed mansion constituted a targeted campaign of emotional terrorism. He was suing his own daughter for intentional infliction of emotional distress and catastrophic loss of lifestyle. I was actively arguing that I owed him financial restitution for the high society lifestyle he had squandered through his own gross incompetence. He wanted me to pay for his country club dues, his luxury cars, and his elite status. He was completely broke, living in the exact same miserable conditions he had forced upon me at 18, and his immediate response was to try and legally extort the child he had ruthlessly thrown away. The $50 million lawsuit resting in my hands was a masterpiece of absolute delusion. I stood on the cobblestone driveway reading the ridiculous claims Desmond had filed against me. He was not just suing for emotional distress. He had hired a notorious high-percentage contingency lawyer named Bradley Stone. Bradley was famous in Atlanta for taking frivolous cases and harassing wealthy defendants into quiet settlements. The lawsuit claimed that my entire private equity firm was built on a stolen family business model. Desmond was actively arguing that I had taken his proprietary logistics strategies and used his corporate funds to launch my empire. He wanted 50% of my total net worth, claiming I was simply an ungrateful daughter who had hijacked her father's legacy. I did not settle. I did not panic. I simply instructed my legal team to schedule a formal deposition immediately. 2 weeks later, I sat at a long glass table inside a sterile high-rise conference room. The court reporter sat quietly in the corner, typing every spoken word onto the official record. Desmond sat directly across from me, wearing a cheap suit he had likely bought off a discount rack. He looked worn out, but his eyes gleamed with a desperate, toxic arrogance. He genuinely believed his sleazy lawyer was about to bully me into handing over a massive check. Bradley Stone paced aggressively back and forth across the carpet, gripping a legal pad. He was trying to command the room using loud, intimidating tactics that probably worked well on terrified civilians. They were not going to work on me. "State your name for the record," Bradley barked, leaning heavily over the glass table to invade my personal space. I kept my posture perfectly straight and my voice completely neutral. "Zoe Helena, CEO and sole founder of Apex Holdings." Bradley smirked, glancing triumphantly at Desmond. "Sole founder. That is a very interesting choice of words, Zoe. Is it not true that your father Desmond provided you with the foundational business strategies you currently use? Is it not true that you utilized his extensive corporate network and his financial backing to secure your very first commercial properties?" "That is entirely false," I replied, my tone remaining remarkably calm. Bradley slammed his hand down on the glass table. "Do not lie under oath, Zoe. We have testimony from your own mother, stating you were an aggressive, difficult teenager who constantly demanded money. You took your father's proprietary real estate formulas. You drained resources from his logistics company to fund your own selfish ventures. You stole your father's legacy, and then you threw him out onto the street like a piece of garbage." You are nothing but an ungrateful thief hiding behind a corporate title. Desmond nodded vigorously, a smug expression spreading across his tired face. He leaned forward, expecting me to break down or lash out in anger. He wanted me to look like the aggressive, bitter black woman his lawyer was desperately trying to paint me as. I refused to give them the satisfaction. "Are you quite finished, Mr. Stone?" I asked, raising a single eyebrow. Bradley sneered, crossing his arms. "I am just getting started. We are going to expose exactly how you financed your empire using your father money." I slowly reached down and unlatched my leather briefcase. "I am so glad you brought up the topic of initial financing," I said smoothly, "because I brought the exact financial records demonstrating how my business was founded." I pulled out a thick stack of bank statements bound by a heavy metal clip. I slid the stack across the smooth glass table until it stopped directly in front of Bradley Stone. "I highly suggest you look at page 4, I instructed. Bradley frowned, picking up the documents. Desmond shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his smug expression faltering slightly. "What you are looking at is a verified financial ledger from 14 years ago." I explained, my voice echoing clearly in the quiet conference room. "It is the custodial bank account established by my late grandmother, specifically meant to fund my college education. You will notice a sudden complete withdrawal of $85,000 exactly 2 days before my 18th birthday. The authorized signer who executed that withdrawal was Desmond." Bradley's eyes scanned the page, his arrogant posture suddenly stiffening. "If you turn to page 5, I continued relentlessly, you will see the exact wire transfer receipt showing where that money went. Desmond did not use those funds to help me start a business. He illegally drained my entire college trust fund and wired the exact amount to a luxury car dealership in Buckhead to buy my sister Chloe a brand new Porsche." Desmond's face drained of all color. He gripped the edges of the table, staring at the documents in pure horror. He never expected me to keep the receipts. When I confronted him about stealing my future, he kicked me out of the house with nothing but a trash bag of clothes, I stated, looking directly into the camera recording the deposition. "I did not build my empire with his money. I built it in spite of him stealing mine." If you turn to page 6, you will see a copy of a cleared check for exactly $500. That was a personal loan from a college professor who believed in my work ethic. That $500 was my entire startup capital. My father gave me absolutely nothing except a masterclass in financial exploitation. Bradley Stone flipped rapidly through the pages. The color slowly drained from his face as he realized the sheer magnitude of the situation. He was a sleazy lawyer who worked on contingency, meaning he only got paid if he won the case. Desmond had lied to him. Desmond had promised him an easy slam-dunk settlement against an intimidated daughter. Instead, Desmond had walked him right into a documented case of felony financial abuse. "Mr. Stone," I said, leaning forward, resting my hands on the table, "you are currently representing a man who committed custodial fraud, and you are using those fabricated claims to extort a billionaire. I have a team of corporate litigators waiting in the hallway. The moment this deposition concludes, I am filing a countersuit for malicious prosecution, and I will be naming you personally as a co-defendant." Bradley dropped the documents onto the table as if they were physically burning his hands. He looked at Desmond with absolute furious disgust. "You told me you funded her first company," Bradley hissed, his voice shaking with anger. "You told me she took $2 million from your corporate accounts. You completely lied to me, Desmond." Desmond stammered, raising his hands defensively. "Bradley, listen to me. We can still spin this. She is just trying to confuse the narrative. We can still win." Bradley Stone did not hesitate. He snapped his briefcase shut with a loud, violent crack. He turned to the court reporter who was still typing every word. "Let the record show that as of this exact moment, I am officially withdrawing as counsel for the plaintiff," Bradley announced, his voice ringing with absolute finality. "I am dropping this case entirely," Bradley Desmond shouted, panic completely overtaking his features. "You cannot do this. We have a signed contract. You cannot just walk out on me." "Watch me," Bradley spat, grabbing his coat. "You are completely bankrupt, Desmond, and you just tried to make me an accomplice to your extortion scheme. You are entirely on your own." The lawyer turned on his heel and stormed out of the conference room, the heavy glass door slamming shut behind him. Desmond was left sitting completely alone at the table, stripped of his legal representation, stripped of his false narrative, and totally exposed on the official legal record. I sat across from him perfectly calm, watching the absolute destruction of his final desperate illusion. My legal team entered the conference room less than 30 seconds after Bradley Stone walked out. My lead attorney placed a freshly stamped countersuit for malicious prosecution, harassment, and intentional fraud directly in front of my father. Desmond did not even look at the paperwork. He sat motionless, staring blankly at the empty chair where his lawyer had sat just moments before. The fire of his arrogant entitlement had been extinguished permanently. There was no defiance left in his posture, no sneer on his lips, and no wealthy son-in-law to shield him from the consequences of his actions. He was a completely broken man, who had finally hit the concrete floor of his own making. Within 48 hours, the fallout was absolute, with no attorney willing to represent him on contingency and facing devastating legal fees from my countersuit. Desmond formally withdrew his $50 million claim with prejudice. That meant he could never legally challenge my assets or drag me into court again. Every door in Atlanta was slammed shut in his face. Former business associates crossed the street to avoid making eye contact with him. The prestigious banks he had courted for decades placed him on permanent blacklists. He had traded his business, his mansion, his reputation, and his relationship with his daughter for the illusion of elite proximity, and he was left with absolute zero. 3 days later, a courier arrived at my corporate headquarters, carrying a thick, unmarked craft envelope. My executive assistant brought it to my desk, confirming it had been delivered by hand. I sliced open the seal and pulled out a stack of lined yellow legal paper covered in dense, shaky blue ink. It was a 10-page handwritten letter from Desmond. I sat in my high-back leather chair overlooking the Atlanta skyline and began to read. For the first time in 32 years, my father was not writing as an authority figure, a patriarch, or a master manipulator. He was writing as a man who had stripped away every lie he had ever told himself. The letter was raw, unpolished, and devastatingly honest. He did not ask for money. He did not ask for a nicer apartment. He did not ask me to drop my countersuit. Instead, he systematically cataloged 3 decades of failure. He wrote about the paralyzing fear of inadequacy that had consumed him as a young black businessman trying to break into white-dominated spaces in Georgia. He confessed that his obsession with country clubs, luxury European cars, and gated suburban estates was never about genuine security, but about a desperate, pathetic hunger to be validated by the very people who looked down on him. He admitted that his toxic pursuit of status had poisoned the way he raised his children. He wrote about the deep-seated colorism that had blinded him, confessing that he had praised Chloe because her lighter skin and compliant nature made her easy to market to high society, while he had punished me because my dark skin and fierce independence reminded him of his own unresolved struggles. He confessed that when Preston walked into our lives, he had viewed the wealthy white man as the ultimate trophy, a golden ticket that would finally grant our family permanent acceptance into elite circles. The most painful pages were the ones where he addressed his cruelty. He acknowledged that he had deliberately stolen my $85,000 college trust fund because he feared my potential would outshine the carefully curated image he had built around Chloe. He admitted that every time Preston had made a racist joke at family dinners, every time Preston had dismissed my work as ghetto or uncultured, Desmond had stayed silent because he was terrified of offending his white son-in-law. He wrote that his greatest shame was standing on the porch when I was 18, watching me walk away with a single trash bag of clothes, knowing deep down that he was discarding the only child who truly possessed the brilliance and integrity he had spent his life pretending to have. I laid the 10 pages flat on my desk. The room was deathly quiet. I felt no triumphant rush of adrenaline, no vindictive joy, and no desire to gloat. What I felt was a profound, grounding stillness. I recognized that the letter was genuine. Desmond had not written it to manipulate me into signing a check. He had written it because the crushing weight of his guilt had finally broken through the fortress of his narcissism. Yet as I looked at his shaking handwriting, I also knew a fundamental truth that many women learn only after years of heartbreak. Genuine remorse does not erase decades of calculated trauma. An apology on a piece of paper could not refund the years of psychological warfare, the nights I spent freezing in my car, the hunger I endured while working 3 minimum wage jobs, or the systematic attempt to steal my commercial assets. Forgiveness was something I could grant internally for my own peace of mind, but reconciliation required trust, and trust was a bridge they had burned to ashes years ago. Boundaries were not an act of cruelty. They were the ultimate act of self-preservation. Later that evening, a severe autumn storm rolled over the city. Thunder rumbled across the dark sky as sheets of heavy rain drenched the pavement. I slipped into my black trench coat, left my office building, and got behind the wheel of my Maybach. I did not take the highway toward my penthouse in Buckhead. Instead, I navigated the slick city streets southward, driving deep into the neighborhood where the rundown apartment complex stood. I pulled up across the street from the decaying brick building and turned off my headlights, leaving the engine quietly idling. The streetlights flickered in the downpour. The cracked neon sign buzzed erratically above the entrance, through the rain-streaked windshield. I saw the front door of the complex creak open. Desmond and Helena emerged into the storm. They were both drenched, wearing faded raincoats that offered little protection against the wind. Helena was clutching 2 flimsy plastic grocery bags filled with generic canned goods, her shoulders hunched against the cold. Desmond walked beside her, his head down, carrying a gallon of cheap milk and a loaf of discounted bread. As they stepped onto the broken sidewalk, the bottom of Helena's plastic bag tore open on a jagged edge of concrete. Cans of beans and processed soup clattered onto the wet asphalt, rolling into a muddy puddle of rainwater. Helena dropped to her knees in the dirt, frantically trying to gather the fallen groceries, while rain plastered her graying hair to her face. Desmond knelt beside her, his hands shaking as he helped her pick up the cans from the mud, his posture entirely defeated. I sat in the warm leather-insulated silence of my luxury car, watching the 2 people who had once ruled their suburban kingdom with an iron fist of cruelty. They were living the exact reality they had designed for themselves, suffering the natural consequences of an empire built on greed, delusion, and betrayal. I watched them for 1 full silent minute. I did not step out into the rain. I did not roll down the window. I simply took a deep, steady breath, placed my hands on the leather steering wheel, and shifted the transmission into drive. I pressed the accelerator and drove away into the stormy night, leaving them behind to face the life they had earned. I drove through the storm that night with a profound sense of closure. The rain washed away the final traces of the hold my parents had over my life. Weeks turned into months, and the legal machinery I had set into motion continued grinding forward with absolute precision. The ultimate conclusion of that machinery arrived on a crisp Tuesday morning in downtown Atlanta. It was the day of Preston's federal sentencing hearing. I walked into the federal building wearing a pristine ivory suit. I wanted to be highly visible, a stark contrast to the dark wood paneling of the courtroom and the grim reality of the criminal justice system. I bypassed the crowded gallery of reporters and curious onlookers, taking my seat directly in the front row, right behind the prosecution table. I wanted Preston to see me the moment he walked into the room. A heavy silence descended over the gallery as the side door opened. 2 armed federal marshals escorted Preston into the courtroom. He was no longer wearing the oversized orange jumpsuit from the holding facility, but the cheap gray suit his public defender had procured for him did nothing to hide his absolute degradation. His posture was completely broken. His shoulders slumped and his hands were shackled at his waist. He shuffled toward the defense table, looking like a hollow shell of the arrogant tech executive who had once bragged about his untouchable pedigree. He did not look back at the gallery. He stared blankly at the polished wooden table in front of him, terrified of the severe judgment that was about to fall upon him. The bailiff ordered the courtroom to rise as the judge took his seat at the high bench. He was a no-nonsense jurist, known for his absolute intolerance of white-collar crime. He adjusted his glasses, looking down at Preston with a piercing gaze that stripped away any remaining illusions of superiority. Mr. Vance, the judge, began, his voice echoing with heavy authority. I have reviewed the extensive evidence presented in this case. I have read the transcripts of your financial manipulations, your fraudulent offshore accounts, and your aggressive attempts to frame your own father-in-law for your crimes. I have also listened to the audio recordings of the racial slurs and the aggressive intimidation tactics you used against your sister-in-law. Preston flinched visibly as the judge referenced the parking garage confrontation. You stand before this court, the judge continued, not as a victim of circumstance, but as a textbook example of unchecked arrogance and weaponized privilege. You were born into immense wealth and infinite opportunity. You had every possible advantage a person could possess in this society. Yet you chose to use those advantages to systematically steal from your own family, to fund a non-existent company, and to manipulate the justice system to cover your tracks. You believed your last name and your social status made you entirely immune to any real-world consequence. You believed you could commit federal fraud and simply point the finger at a black man, assuming this court would blindly accept your racist narrative. The courtroom was completely silent. The reporters in the back row furiously typed every word onto their digital notepads. You are a predator, Mr. Vance, the judge stated coldly. And this court will not allow predators to hide behind expensive suits and country club memberships. Please stand for your formal sentencing. Preston struggled to stand, his shackled hands trembling violently. His public defender had to hold his arm to keep him steady. For the crimes of wire fraud, money laundering, and perjury, the judge declared, I sentence you to 15 years in a federal penitentiary. Given the severity of your actions and your attempt to obstruct justice, this sentence will be served without the possibility of early parole. Furthermore, I order the total asset forfeiture of all your remaining personal accounts to provide full restitution to the parties you defrauded. Preston's knees buckled. The public defender had to catch him before he hit the floor. 15 years. He would be in his 50s by the time he saw the outside of a prison wall, and he would walk out completely penniless. His billionaire father had abandoned him. His wife had been forced into manual labor. He had absolutely nothing left. The judge slammed his heavy wooden gavel down, finalizing the absolute destruction of Preston Vance. The federal marshals immediately stepped forward, grabbing Preston by the arms, to escort him out of the courtroom to begin his 15-year sentence. As they turned him around to face the center aisle, Preston finally lifted his head. His eyes scanned the front row and locked directly onto mine. The arrogant smirk, the condescending glare, the wealthy entitlement, it was all entirely gone. His eyes were red and filled with unadulterated terror and profound regret. As the marshals pulled him toward the exit, he looked at me and silently mouthed 2 words. I am sorry. I did not smile. I did not frown. I simply gave him a slight cold nod, acknowledging his absolute defeat. It was not a nod of forgiveness. It was a confirmation that the massive debt had been fully collected. I remained in the front row until the heavy wooden doors closed behind him. I smoothed my ivory suit, picked up my designer handbag, and walked out of the courtroom. The air in the federal building hallway felt remarkably light. I navigated through the crowd of reporters, declining to give immediate comments to the local press. I pushed through the heavy glass doors of the courthouse and stepped out into the bright, warm Atlanta sunlight. The entire city seemed to look entirely different now that the heavy, dark shadow of my family had been completely lifted from my shoulders forever. My security team was waiting by my Maybach at the bottom of the concrete steps. As I walked down, an impeccably dressed woman with a sharp bob cut stepped out from behind a large marble pillar, intercepting my path before my security guards could react. Ms. Helena, the woman said, raising her hands politely to show she was not a threat. My name is Victoria Hayes. I am an executive producer for the National Broadcast Network. I have been closely following your massive corporate acquisitions, the rapid fall of the Vance empire, and the total collapse of your elite family estate. She handed me a sleek black business card with gold-embossed lettering. We want to produce an exclusive primetime documentary on your rise to absolute power and the destruction of your corrupt family. And we want you to tell the entire story yourself. I looked at the black business card resting in my hand. Victoria Hayes stood perfectly still, waiting for my response. A national primetime documentary was an absolute guarantee that my parents could never rewrite history. I met her ambitious gaze and gave a single decisive nod. "We film in my corporate office," I told her. "You get full access to the financial records, the court transcripts, and my unedited perspective." 2 weeks later, my executive suite was transformed into a professional broadcast studio. Heavy cameras surrounded my custom mahogany desk. I wore a tailored royal blue suit projecting absolute calm and unshakable authority. I did not sit in front of the nation to play the weeping victim. I sat there as a conqueror, detailing how to survive a battlefield built by your blood. Victoria asked her questions, allowing me to speak directly to the audience. I held nothing back. I broke down the poison of chasing proximity to whiteness. I explained how my parents were so desperate to escape their own blackness that they worshipped Preston simply for his elite white pedigree. They willingly sacrificed their own daughter just to secure a seat at a country club table where they were secretly despised. I dismantled the golden child syndrome, exposing how my parents' suffocating enablement destroyed my sister. They turned Chloe into a trophy, stripping away her ability to survive. Then I spoke directly to the Black women watching. I laid out the absolute necessity of financial independence. Money is not just currency. I stated, my voice carrying absolute conviction through the camera lens. For marginalized women, money is a protective fortress. It is the only shield that stops toxic family members and corrupt institutions from dictating the terms of your existence. Build your fortress in absolute silence and never hand over the keys. The documentary aired on a Sunday night. By Monday morning, it became a massive cultural phenomenon. It shattered television ratings and dominated every social media platform across the country. The hashtag detailing my story trended globally for an entire week. My corporate inbox was completely flooded. I received thousands of emails and handwritten letters from women all over the nation. They shared their own painful stories of escaping narcissistic parents, breaking free from toxic golden child dynamics, and fighting against systems designed to keep them dependent. Women who had been labeled the black sheep of their families suddenly recognized their own unrecognized strength. They saw my victory as a blueprint for their own liberation. The narrative completely shifted from a scandalous local Atlanta gossip piece to a powerful national conversation about breaking generational curses. I refused to let that momentum fade into a fleeting trend. I had the capital and the ultimate opportunity to enact systemic change. I called my executive board into a meeting and laid out the blueprints for my most ambitious project yet. I officially launched the Phoenix Initiative. It was a massive corporate incubator and grant program designed exclusively to fund and mentor businesses owned by marginalized women. I did not use my own standard corporate profits to fund the initial capital. I used the exact funds I had legally acquired during the hostile takeover of the Vance empire. Every dollar that Preston and his corrupt father had hoarded through aggressive redlining and predatory lending was completely liquidated and poured directly into the initiative. I took the stolen wealth built on systemic discrimination and redistributed it to the exact demographic they had spent decades trying to suppress. The Phoenix Initiative offered seed money, legal counsel, and elite business mentorship to Black female founders who had been denied traditional bank loans. We were building an army of financially independent women who could never be manipulated or controlled by toxic families or corrupt systems. The launch was an absolute triumph. To celebrate the initiative, I planned a grand gala. I chose the venue with calculated precision. I was hosting the massive event at the Buckhead Mansion, my childhood home. The $5 million estate I had purchased in cash at the public bank auction was newly renovated and ready to host the most powerful women in the country. The night before the grand gala, the mansion was buzzing with caterers, florists, and event planners setting up the final arrangements. The heavy crystal chandeliers sparkled above the grand sweeping staircase. The massive dining room where Desmond and Helena used to mock my ambitions was now filled with display boards highlighting the incredible startup companies funded by the Phoenix Initiative. I walked through the pristine marble halls, feeling a deep, settling peace. The house no longer held any dark ghosts. It was completely scrubbed clean of the trauma it once housed. It was finally a place of empowerment and true community. Around midnight, the event staff cleared out, leaving me entirely alone in the sprawling estate. I poured myself a tall glass of cold sparkling water and walked slowly toward the grand front entrance to lock the heavy mahogany double doors for the rest of the night. As I reached for the polished brass handle, I noticed a strange shadow resting quietly on the stone of the expansive front porch. I opened the door and stepped out into the cool night air. A small, unmarked velvet box sat directly in the center of the welcome mat. There was no return address and no note attached. The security guards had not reported any visitors or deliveries. I carefully picked up the small velvet box. It felt surprisingly heavy resting in my palm. My pulse quickened slightly as I slowly undid the small brass clasp. The lid popped open, revealing the dark satin interior. Inside the dark box was a very familiar piece of custom jewelry. It was the exact same diamond tennis bracelet my mother Helena had been forced to hand over as collateral to the country club manager on the day I exposed their massive unpaid debt. I stood on the stone porch of my Buckhead mansion, letting the diamonds catch the soft glow of the exterior carriage lights. Mr. Sterling, the general manager of Oakmont Country Club, had clearly orchestrated this delivery. He knew exactly what this piece of jewelry represented. This bracelet symbolized my mother's toxic obsession with status. It was the armor she wore to shield herself from her own blackness, the shiny distraction she used to justify discarding her own daughter. Now it was just cold metal resting in the palm of the woman she had thrown away. I closed the velvet box with a sharp, definitive snap. I walked back through the heavy mahogany doors of my newly renovated estate. The house was alive with the vibrant sounds of caterers preparing for the grand gala. But I bypassed the busy foyer and headed straight to my private executive office, walking over to a custom-built reinforced glass display case mounted against the far wall. I placed the small velvet box directly in the center and locked the heavy glass door securely. I did not keep it to wear it, and I certainly did not keep it out of sentimental attachment to a mother who never loved me. I kept it as a permanent, unyielding reminder of exactly where I came from and the ruthless psychological warfare I had to overcome to secure my total freedom. Helena Conditional Love was now permanently locked away, entirely powerless. I turned my back on the display case and walked out of the office to join the celebration. The mansion was unrecognizable from the sterile environment my parents meticulously maintained. They had decorated this house to mimic old-money European sensibilities, desperately trying to erase any trace of cultural identity. I had stripped all of that away entirely. The walls were now adorned with vibrant, powerful artwork from emerging Black artists. The sterile classical music was replaced by a live jazz band setting a rich, joyful tone that echoed through the grand hallways. As I descended the sweeping marble staircase, the sheer magnitude of my victory washed over me. The grand ballroom was not filled with pretentious country club snobs or corrupt business executives. The room was packed with genuine friends, successful peers, and brilliant entrepreneurs who supported each other without condition. I saw Marcus, my corporate assistant, laughing warmly with venture capitalists. I saw Mr. Sterling raising a glass of champagne with the brilliant female founders who had just received full funding from the Phoenix Initiative. These were people who valued character over pedigree. They respected the hustle, the intellect, and the integrity required to build an empire from absolute scratch. I walked through the crowd exchanging genuine hugs and words of mutual respect. There was no need to shrink myself, no need to perform for conditional approval, and absolutely no need to apologize for my power. I was surrounded by my chosen family. I reached the base of the grand staircase and signaled for the jazz band to softly fade out. I tapped a silver spoon against a crystal flute of sparkling water. The clear ringing sound immediately captured the attention of the entire ballroom. Hundreds of powerful, brilliant faces turned toward me, their expressions filled with unwavering respect and genuine admiration. "Welcome to my home." I began, my voice carrying strong and steady across the silent room. For a long time, this house was a fortress of exclusion. It was a place where love was entirely conditional, where ambition was a threat, and where extreme wealth was used as a weapon to destroy family bonds rather than strengthen them. Many of us in this room know exactly what it feels like to carry the heavy, suffocating weight of generational trauma. We know what it means to be the scapegoat, to be told that we are too loud, too independent, or too dark to fit into the fragile boxes that toxic relatives design for us. A murmur of profound agreement rippled through the crowd. Women nodded their eyes, reflecting their own survived battles. But we also know the incredible unmatched power of walking away. I continued raising my glass slightly higher. We learned that the best response to betrayal is not to beg for a seat at a table where you are secretly despised. The best response is to buy the entire building and construct a brand new table. We are standing here tonight as living proof that you can break generational curses. You can sever the chains of narcissistic abuse, and you can redefine exactly what family means. Family is not determined by blood or shared last names. Family is defined by the people who celebrate your strength, who fiercely protect your peace, and who stand beside you when you are building your empire. To the women of the Phoenix Initiative, and to the beautiful chosen family filling this room, I offer this toast. May we always find the courage to walk away from toxicity, and may we forever enjoy the exceptionally sweet peace of living well. The entire ballroom erupted into deafening applause. Crystal glasses clinked harmoniously, echoing off the high ceilings of the mansion I reclaimed and transformed. I took a slow, refreshing sip of my water, looking out over the incredible community I had built from the ashes of my past. The heavy burden of seeking parental approval was completely eradicated. I felt light, grounded, and absolutely untouchable. The camera pans back, slowly capturing the vibrant room before focusing on my face. I offer a bright, genuine smile, radiating pure, unbothered power. Narrator voice. Sometimes the family you are born into is just the fire you need to forge your own empire. Have you ever had to walk away from toxic blood to protect your peace? Share your story in the comments below. Do not forget to like and subscribe for more stories of sweet revenge.